This happened back when I was a kid. I don't remember every detail that well, but I will tell you what I can. I believe I was 10 years old at this time. I lived with my parents and two siblings in a pretty average-sized house. In our neighborhood, there were lots of other houses. I would often go out into the front or backyard and hang out with my siblings. So one time, I know that I was in the front yard, but I was by myself. I was playing with this dodgeball that we had, and I was kicking it around. I kicked it one of the times, and I guess it went a little far and ended up going out into the street. Now, the street that we lived in was usually pretty quiet, and there were not regularly cars driving down. My parents still always told me not to leave our yard, but I had to go to get the ball, so I started to run after it as I saw it rolling down the street. When I got out into the street, I was still a long ways from the ball. That's when I noticed a man standing on the side of the road near the sidewalk. He was a few houses down from mine, and he walked over and picked up the ball. There were a few cars parked on the side of the road as well. The man was standing like maybe he had gotten out of one. I went a little bit closer, and when the guy noticed me, he waved. I remember that I thought he would toss the ball back to me. I waved at him and held my hands out for the ball, but instead, he waved me over to him. Then, I walked the rest of the way towards the guy, and when I got to him, he asked me if it was my ball, and I said yes. The guy then unlocked the car parked near the side of the road that was by us. He then tried to get me to go inside of it. I don't remember exactly what he said, but I think he might have told me that he'd give the ball back if I went with him. I just know that while holding onto the ball, he got into the driver's seat and then opened up the back door. I knew better than to get inside of this guy's car though. I was still really confused. I wasn't really sure who this guy was and why he was here in the first place. After sitting in the driver's seat of the car and opening the back door, he then tossed the ball into the back seat. He motioned for me to go in, but instead, I just turned and ran back towards our house. I knew this guy was trouble. He did not chase after me, and when I got back into the front yard, I finally stopped. I watched this guy drive away in the opposite direction, not going by our house. Then I went inside. I found my mom and told her about it. She went outside, but the guy was gone. She ended up calling the police about it. Unfortunately, I couldn't give very good details. I didn't know the license plate or even exactly what kind of car it was. And to this day, I don't remember any details like that. The man got away with stealing my ball, but more importantly, he wasn't able to kidnap me. However, I remember a couple of years later, I think it was, when I was maybe 12 or 13, I was going on a walk through my neighborhood, and I happened to be one street over from mine. I rarely went to this street when I was a kid, but I know that when I was walking down the street, I happened to pass by this one house, and I saw this guy that was outside in the yard. When I saw him, I remembered the guy from a couple of years ago. I wasn't 100% sure, but I think it was the same guy. I never said anything or did anything because I really wasn't 100%, and I didn't want to accuse the guy, but I still think to this day that that was the same person. I recently moved to Florida from Pennsylvania for my job. All my friends and family are still in Pennsylvania, so I live by myself, which can get spooky. My second week in Florida, I met my next door neighbor Eddie. He seemed like a relatively normal guy in his 70s, very quiet and polite. One day they turned the water off in the whole complex for repairs without notice, so I went over to Eddie's to ask if his water was off too. He answered the door and proceeded to talk to me for about a half hour. I obliged because I hadn't seen him get any visitors and I assumed that he was lonely. Towards the end of the conversation though, it started to get creepy. He said that he was on his balcony one day watching the neighbor girl across from her window as she took bikini pictures. He then said, "If I had daughters, I'd be constantly scared that they were doing that. You don't scare your dad like that, do you?" It put a bad taste in my mouth, but I just attributed it to his loneliness. A few days later, a looming shadow appeared in front of me, and I saw Eddie briefly looking in my windows. To my knowledge, he only had an ex-wife with no kids, partner, or family. Fast forward a couple of weekends when my boyfriend came to visit me, and we were out all day at the flea market. I came back to a note on my door from Eddie which said I had a package delivered and he had picked it up for me. My boyfriend went to the bathroom, and I went next door to pick up my package. I knocked, and there was no answer. Later, Eddie came to my door in the shortest robe ever and said that he had been in the shower. I said, "Oh, okay, thanks for picking up my package," and before I could close the door, Eddie mentioned that my boyfriend and I didn't need to be quiet that night. You can guess what he was insinuating, and it was a very odd comment to make. Fast forward to about 2 weeks when I got home from work one day. The people from my apartment's office were up on my landing in front of my door, which I assumed was a maintenance repair I had reported, but I didn't understand why it took 3 of them. I walked up the stairs, and they asked me when the last time I had seen Eddie was. I told them about the encounter 2 weeks prior. I entered my apartment, and a few minutes later, they knocked on my door and asked me if the man on a scan of an ID was my neighbor, to which I confirmed. After that, I went to the store to pick up some ice, and when I returned, there were 2 police cars in the parking lot. I approached the stairs, and everyone on the landing was looking at me. When I got up the stairs, the officer asked me when the last time I saw Eddie was. I reiterated my previous answer and went back to my apartment and started my nightly cleaning. Around 10 minutes later, a different cop knocked and asked the same question, to which I answered as well. I guess I was the last person to report seeing him. My neighbor Eddie had died. Apparently, it was likely that it was a week or 2 before they found him. He must have not had anyone to check on him in that time. I also felt bad for not checking on him because I hadn't seen him for a while, but I just attributed it to opposite schedules, and after the weird comments, I wasn't planning on talking to him. In his apartment, the police had found a lot of pictures of me coming and going from my place that had been developed from a throwaway camera. The creepiest part is that I had been hearing sounds from the wall that our apartments share, knocking sounds, even though no one currently lives there since he died. Looking back, that was very creepy. I live by myself in a 1-bedroom apartment. My building has 4 floors and I'm on the top. I've enjoyed living here for the most part, but I almost moved out after something that happened a while ago. It's now been 4 months since the incident occurred. I had been living there long enough to know several of my neighbors and what they looked like. I would occasionally see them coming and going as I did. I wasn't really friends with any of them though. Well, one night, like any other, I went to bed at the time I usually did, about 10 o'clock. I remember waking up in the middle of the night though, and immediately hearing this noise. It sounded like my apartment door was being unlocked. The next thing that I knew, my front door opened up. When I heard this, I was suddenly wide awake, and I got out of my bed and stood up. But I didn't really hear anything else now. I was wondering what exactly was going on. After like a minute, I walked to my doorway, which was closed. Then I slowly opened up the door. Every light was off in my apartment, so I really couldn't see much of anything. About the only light came from my window, which was partly open, and there were some lights from outside. So I looked out into the rest of my apartment, and after several moments, I still didn't hear or see anything. There was a light switch that I could just barely reach. I felt around on the wall and then turned the light on. As soon as it came on, I saw that there was this random woman standing in the middle of my living room. It was one of the craziest things I've ever seen. But then I realized that this wasn't some random woman. She was one of my neighbors. As soon as I noticed her, she moved and started running away towards the front door. Then she left my apartment and was gone. I really had no idea what was happening, but I knew that the woman was not supposed to be in my place, so I called the cops. I waited around until they got there. The woman was my neighbor from down the hallway, and I had never even spoken to her, but I had seen her a few times here and there. After the police got there, I told them that my neighbor had somehow broken into my place. I gave them all the details of what happened. They went over to my neighbor's and knocked on her door. I remember that she acted like she had been asleep and had no clue what was going on. She completely denied the entire thing. I was afraid that it was going to just be my word against hers, but luckily, my apartment building had pretty good security cameras. After looking at them, it was clear that she had entered my place. Somehow, she was able to pick the lock. I honestly have no clue, but I pressed charges against her, and she was evicted shortly after. My apartment building also had to replace the locks. I really don't know why she wanted to get into my place. I'm really glad that I woke up when I did though. I'm going to tell you a horrifying story of my next door neighbor I used to have. I live in a single-family home with my wife and our dog Sparky in a residential neighborhood. There are quite a few different houses on our street, and we have 1 acre of land, as do most of the neighbors. We've lived here for 5 years now, ever since getting married. Our next-door neighbor had been quite a jerk since the day he moved in. He had been nothing short of a nightmare and started living next door to us about a year after we moved in. His name was Dan, and I know that he was recently divorced. I understand that that can be hard, and it's okay to be going through a difficult time, but that was no excuse for his behavior. I'm only guessing that that's what caused him to act the way that he did. To give some examples, I would say most houses on our street are pretty nice and well maintained. They're not all that large, but the grass is green and mowed frequently. Most people also have nice landscape and flowers and such. The first time I talked to Dan, he insulted our flowers, saying that we should replace them all and they looked bad. He also made bad comments about my car, a Ford Fusion, saying that it was terrible. He wasn't joking either, like my wife thought he was when I told her about it. She soon found out for herself. When she was outside in the backyard once, she said that he told her our house was the ugliest on the block. When I went outside after, I saw him standing in his backyard, seemingly drunk, telling me to F off. After these first few interactions, I tried to stay away from Dan. The next time I talked to him was like a month later when he came over to tell us that we needed to keep our dog inside at all times. We would sometimes have Sparky out in the front or backyard on a leash. The leash would be attached to a stake in the ground. We did not have a fence around our property at all, but Sparky's leash was not nearly long enough to even come close to reaching past the property line. Dan claimed that he hated dogs and did not want to have to see it in our front yard. I basically took my turn and told him to F off. He angrily walked away, and after that, we didn't interact, but he still made his presence known. He would start leaving his stuff on our property. There were no fences, but there was pretty obvious property lines. Anybody with common sense would be able to tell where it changed from our yard to Dan's. He put his old canoe in the backyard, almost completely on our property. He also had an old patio table that he put in our yard. One day, I had enough, and I moved both of these things over about 10 feet until they were completely in his yard. I was even thinking of having a fence put up because of him. I didn't want to let him win. But just the very next day, my wife came inside in the evening and told me that Sparky was missing. He had been out in the yard on his leash like he often was. The leash was still there, as was his collar, but he was gone. At first, we thought he somehow slipped out of his collar. Dogs can do that sometimes, and I didn't know how else to explain it. My wife and I took to the streets and started searching all around the neighborhood for Sparky. We went to several neighbors' houses and asked them if they had seen him at all, but nobody had. We were worried like crazy and didn't know how this could have happened. For hours, we searched the area until about 9 p.m. When we got back home, I just went into the backyard as my wife went inside to call more neighbors and ask them. That's when I heard a faint bark. I thought maybe it was a neighbor's dog at first, but I just had this feeling like it was Sparky. I walked over to where I had heard it, which happened to be in Dan's backyard. I called out Sparky's name and heard the barking again. I ran over and heard that it was coming from inside Dan's shed that he had in his backyard. I tried opening it, but there was a large lock on it and I couldn't get it open. I ran to Dan's house and pounded on his front door like crazy. He didn't answer though. I was knocking on his door for like 5 minutes without a response. So after that, I called the police. When they arrived, they heard Sparky barking from inside the shed. A short time later, they were finally able to open it. Sure enough, Sparky was inside, and we pressed charges. He didn't get that heavy of a penalty though. I think he just got probation. But he did have to move out of the neighborhood, which I was really glad to see. I'm hoping that I never see him again. It was 2 a.m. one night, and I had a friend over at my house, and we were still awake and talking. We suddenly heard loud noises coming from outside, and my friend joked that maybe somebody was breaking into my car. Unfortunately, she was dead on. When we went to look out the window, we had a clear view, but the darkness obscured the details. My friend tried to get a good picture of the people breaking into my car, while I ran to my phone, which was charging in a different room, to call the cops. When I arrived back at the window from my call with the cops, my friend relayed to me everything that I had missed. She said that she saw two men wearing hooded sweatshirts and dark clothing. They had torn apart my car, prying open the doors and breaking windows, tearing apart all my belongings that were inside. After a bit, one of the thieves had run off, leaving the other thief behind, who was still vandalizing the car after scattering stuff from inside my car all over the ground. Just then, I noticed my neighbor's car pulling out of his garage. The other thief eventually ran away, and as we waited for the cops to arrive, I wondered if my neighbor had seen anything as he was getting ready to leave his house. We filed a police report showing them the pictures that my friend had taken of the people. They said they would look into it, and then they left. As we were heading back inside my house, upset, my neighbor's car returned and parked in his garage. I pointed it out to my friend as he was driving by, and I asked if it would be rude to go and ask my neighbor if he had seen anything, since it was the middle of the night still. My friend's expression shifted and rushed me into the house. She went on to explain that my neighbor who had arrived home had been one of the men breaking into my car. She was certain of it. We had briefly seen my neighbor's outfit as he walked into his house, and it matched the blurry photo from earlier. He was wearing the same dark hoodie. Not only that, but from inside my house, we watched as he stepped out of his car and walked straight across the street to my house. We peered out from around a dark corner as he approached the living room window and looked inside my house. Then he walked back to his house casually as if nothing had happened. I called the cops back immediately, saying that my neighbor was the one who had been vandalizing my car. When the cops returned, they knocked on his door. He didn't answer, even though we knew he was there. After a few minutes, the officers walked back to us, saying there was nothing more they could do tonight and they'd keep an eye on him. Later that morning, after not much sleep, I peered through the window again. There was a note on my car now. All the note said was, "Call me," with a number on there. I wanted to call him and rage at him over the phone, but my friend convinced me not to call, since it probably wasn't a good idea. After some digging on Google of his number and address, I discovered that he was a faculty member at one of the top schools in our city. I visited the police station multiple times throughout the next month, hoping for updates, but nothing happened. I tried to avoid looking at our neighbor whenever he was outside, watering his plants or tending to his yard. What's creepy is that he has to know that I know he did it. I'm not sure how the police haven't been able to do anything about it, especially with all the information I've given them. Maybe he bribed them. I really don't know. I just have to live by this guy now who did this to me, and I have no idea why he did. I've never even talked to him or did anything that I would know to upset him prior to the incident. This happened last fall. I live in a pretty normal neighborhood. Each house has about a half-acre lot, and most of the houses are 2 stories. One night, I was inside watching a show on Netflix. I got really into it and ended up staying up until almost 3 in the morning. Anyways, at some point, I went into the kitchen to get something to drink. I know it was really late at this hour, and I casually looked out my window. As I did, I thought I saw my next-door neighbor Dan in his backyard. I looked closer and saw it was in fact Dan, and he was in his backyard digging. It wasn't a great angle, but that looked like it's what he was doing. It seemed strange all right, and I really didn't know Dan all that well. We had only spoken a handful of times briefly, but he seemed like a really nice guy, and I knew there was an explanation for it, so I just went back to my show. The next day, I happened to see Dan as I was leaving for work. I waved at him and he waved back at me. Me being the friendly, talkative guy that I am, I told Dan I had seen him digging in his yard overnight, and I asked him what he buried. I said it and meant it in a joking way and expected Dan to laugh it off, then explain some logical reason for the digging. But instead, Dan's smile disappeared off his face, and he told me he wasn't digging. He paused and then said he had thought he saw a fox in his yard, so he went out to investigate. I knew I had seen him digging for a fact, and I don't know why he would try to hide it like that. I left and went to work, feeling more suspicious about Dan. The next night, I once again got addicted to another show on Netflix. It was something that happened to me often. As I was watching this show very late, I suddenly heard the sound of my back door being opened from downstairs. Unfortunately, it was a door that I rarely locked. I got up, not sure which way to run. After a couple of seconds, I saw Dan in my house. He was making his way up the staircase. He said to me I needed to forget what I saw. I tried to reason with him, asking him what exactly it was he was doing, and I really didn't see anything. Dan told me he wanted to know everything that I saw. I immediately suspected the worst and was afraid he had killed someone or something. I told him I didn't know a thing. Dan then just took off and ran back down my stairs. He left, and once he was gone, I ran down and locked the door. I then called the police, of course. I heard a car screeching away and figured it had to be Dan leaving. When the police showed up, I told them everything. It wasn't until several days later that I got an explanation from police. Dan hadn't killed anybody, but he had stolen some really expensive software from a company he had been fired from. He'd taken it out to his yard and apparently was burying it. The whole thing still confuses me and creeps me out. This is something that happened in the last apartment that I lived in. I moved into it in June of 2021 and lived there for 2 years before moving. After I'd lived there for about a year, I had a new neighbor move in next door. For some details on the apartment building, it's relatively new and was built, I believe, less than 10 years ago. I lived on the second floor and was the right before last unit on one end of it. The building has just straight hallways with units on both sides. My apartment had 1 bedroom, 1.5 bathrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. The new neighbor next door got the very last unit on the end. In my time living there, most of the other neighbors were very friendly. I got to know almost everyone who lived on my floor. The person who previously lived next to me was very nice and we would talk sometimes. A man moved in who didn't seem to be quite as friendly. I just talked to him once shortly after he moved in. I didn't really see him much after that at all though. Maybe like once or twice, but I can't specifically think of a time that I did. Probably like 6 months after the new neighbor guy moved in next door, I was up sort of late one night. I heard some pounding on the wall coming from his side. It wasn't that loud because the walls seemed to do well with holding sound, but I did hear it. I figured maybe he was hanging something on the wall and didn't pay it much thought. However, probably the next night, I was actually woken up hearing it again. It was a little bit louder this time, but I'm also a light sleeper. I tried to just go back to bed, and eventually I did. The very next night, though, I was woken up again. This time, in the middle of the night, I woke up to some sounds coming from my bathroom area. The bathroom is connected to my bedroom, and the door leading to it was mostly closed. All of the lights were out, so when I looked around, I couldn't see anything. I was sitting up in bed trying to figure out what it was that I was hearing. I was also a little bit confused from having just woken up. But then I realized what I was hearing. Somebody was in my bathroom. How they got in, I had no clue. I was sure that I had locked my doors. Then I started to hear footsteps. I jumped up from my bed and only grabbed my phone. Then on the way out, grabbed my keys and ran completely out of my apartment. I kept running down the hallway and went down the stairs. When I had made it all the way out to my car, I called my best friend. Thankfully, she was actually still awake. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. She let me come over and stay at her place for the rest of the night. The next day, we went back to my place. We carefully looked around, and I was expecting the worst. I thought maybe it would be all messed up and a bunch of my items stolen. But surprisingly, everything appeared to be in place. Nobody was inside the apartment at all, and nothing was stolen. I was so confused because I was sure that I had heard somebody in there the night before. My friend asked me about everything that happened. As I was telling her, I walked into my bathroom to where I heard the noise. I'm sending an actual picture of my bathroom so that you can see and get an idea as to what it looked like. To describe where I heard the sounds, I realized it was near my shower. Next to my shower to the right is a very large storage cabinet, or maybe you would even call it a closet. I didn't use it much at all. I just stored extra towels and blankets in there. That's kind of where I heard the noises, and I opened it up. When I did, I saw that some things in there were actually a little bit out of place. Then I moved a towel and saw that the wall had a significant crack in it. At least that's what I thought it was. I hadn't remembered it looking at all like that before. On the other side of the wall was my neighbor, the new guy. That's when I realized that he might have been the one in my apartment. I moved the crack a little and realized that a big chunk of the wall could be removed. Horrified, I moved away from there, and my friend and I left. We called the police and apartment management. They did an investigation, and the guy later admitted to creating a hole in the wall and entering my place. He never said what his intentions were, though. I'm glad that I didn't have to deal with him for the last few months that I lived there, but I ended up moving when my lease was up. I just couldn't live there anymore after what had happened. I'm also really glad that I heard the sound when I did, and was able to leave my apartment so fast. When I was in my very early 20s, I lived in some pretty cheap apartments that were known for being a little sketchy for the area. There was this neighbor that seemed a little bit off, I thought, but how could he be that weird if he was chilling to some old school music most of the time? I'd hear him blast his music and have loud conversations, but then again we both had studio apartments that were touching, so I would just play music not to hear his so loudly. One night he was drinking a lot and had his girlfriend around. I could hear him being belligerent, but nothing that seemed out of the ordinary for him, I suppose. It wasn't too late, so I headed out for the night with some friends while my boyfriend at the time stayed in. I got dropped back off at around 1 a.m. or so, and as we drove into the parking lot from afar, we saw my neighbor outside in between cars and the apartment looking sort of odd. At that point, my friends were more weirded out than I was, because I had been living next to the guy and had gotten used to some of the weird stuff he did. My friends dropped me off out front because it was easier to exit the parking lot without driving all the way in. They drove away and I walked up to go into my apartment, but I had to pass by my strange neighbor's apartment first. My heart dropped because I noticed he was standing still by then with his body hidden by the bush that was between our apartments. As I approached, it seemed like he thought maybe I didn't see him because it was so dark and he was as still as a statue. I waved and mumbled hi to make him aware that I saw him there. Basically like a warning for him not to try anything since no one was out on a weekday at this hour. At that point, after I acknowledged that he was there, he stepped out of the side of the bush and came into the dim-lit porch light, and never in my life have I looked into eyes like his were that night. They were widened, dark, fully dilated just like a wild animal, almost lunatic if I were to express his energy as well. He didn't say anything but gave me a bone-chilling look, and I ran into my apartment immediately. My boyfriend was drowsy since it was late, but he did say the neighbor's music was loud and continued for some time. He said he had heard a ton of noise and arguing earlier but didn't think anything of it. That night, all night we heard thumps from my neighbor's apartment. It also sounded like furniture was moving. It just weirded me out knowing that he was awake in the state that I viewed him in, which seemed almost primal. The next morning, I heard the cops outside banging on his door. I was partially relieved to see them, but then super scared of why they were there in the first place. They took him away in handcuffs shortly after demanding to be let in, and the cops asked me when the last time I talked to him or saw him was. I told them about the previous night, the arguing, the noises, the frightening encounter that I had, and the thumping all night. What I found out during the next day really creeps me out. I was told from the groundskeeper details, and I will keep them simple as it was horrendous. That chill, old-school music-listening neighbor had brutally murdered his girlfriend that night. He dismembered parts of her and dragged the rest of her body near the train tracks which were directly behind our apartments. It hit me that the cold, primal, wide-eyed look I had seen was that of a man who had just took another human being's life. I felt so sad for the woman who did not deserve to go like that. She was always quiet, sweet, and seemed a bit down on her luck usually, asking for cigarettes when I encountered her. To this day, it really creeps me out thinking about how close I was to death, quite literally. He could have ambushed me out of insanity since he was just waiting in the darkness when I walked up to my apartment. I live alone in an apartment. I've lived here for approximately 2 years now. The scariest thing that ever happened in my time living here took place 6 months in. To describe my apartment, it's an average good place, I would say. The building is about 10 years old maybe. It has pretty new technology, and it's overall pretty clean and well maintained. I live on the second floor of a 5-floor building, and I have lots of neighbors. However, I never have met any of them. Occasionally, I will see or hear people walking down the hallway. Sometimes I see the same people here and there, but I have never got to know any of them or anything like that. It's not a big deal though, as I have friends, just not any who live in the building, I guess. Anyways, one evening, I got home from work like any other. I got up to my floor and then walked down the hallway to my room.
However, when I got there, I took out my key fob and held it up to the door to unlock it. But when I did, I heard the door make the locking sound instead of the unlocking sound. This meant that the door had actually been unlocked and I had now just locked it, which gave me a bad feeling as I realized I must have forgotten to lock the door that morning when I left for work. I didn't know how that was possible, but I guess it was. Locking the door when I leave is just something that I do without thinking, so I couldn't say for certain if I had in fact locked it that morning. I walked into my place now feeling paranoid. However, nothing seemed out of place. The lights were also all off how I left them, so I felt better. I figured that I just forgot to lock the door and that was it. I went on with my routine. I went in my bedroom and then changed out of my work clothes. Right when I was about done changing though, I suddenly heard the front door to my apartment open and then moments later it closed. I knew that someone had been in my place. I ran to my bedroom door and looked out, but I saw no one. They must have left. I went to my front door, which was now unlocked again. I looked through my peephole but saw no one. Then I opened my door and looked out to the hallway. When I did, just barely for a second, I saw somebody entering the apartment directly next to mine. It was a ways down the hallway, and it was so fast that I could barely see them. It appeared to be a man, and he quickly went inside. The total time that I saw him was maybe half a second. I didn't recognize him, but very quickly his door shut and he was gone. There was no one else around. So it pretty much had to be him who had been in my place. The hallway was long and straight, so there would be no other places for anybody to hide. I thought about going over there and knocking on his door, but I was too creeped out to do it. I really didn't know what to do. I went around my apartment and looked in every room. Nothing was stolen or out of place to my knowledge at all. I came to the realization that the man must have been inside my apartment, probably hiding in the coat closet, and I had walked right past him. Another crazy thing is that when I was leaving that morning, I literally almost took my jacket from that coat closet. However, I told myself that the weather was warm enough to leave my jacket and I would be fine without it. I ended up regretting it when I was out that day as it was colder than I thought. But if I had in fact took my jacket, the first thing I would have done after arriving home would have been to put it in that coat closet. And then I would have come face to face with that guy. And that's the only hiding place that really makes sense as to where he was. But why was he in there? I have no idea. I still can't believe that it happened. I sent an email to management about it, and they said they would look into the matter. However, I personally never heard anything back. But maybe a month or two after the incident, I was leaving my place one day and I noticed some new people moving furniture into that same apartment next door. So I guess the guy was now gone. I don't even know who he was. I had no clue what he looked like. I just simply said I saw a man go into that apartment. So maybe he got evicted, maybe it was just a coincidence. But I still live here, and I'm always very careful to make sure that I lock the door.
I used to live in this old apartment building. My name is Sabrina, and this took place about 5 years ago now. My place had 1 bedroom and 1.5 bathrooms. Overall, it was not the greatest, but I didn't mind it. I was on the 2nd floor, and there were lots of other people living in the building. But several months after I had started living there, I got a new next-door neighbor. His name was Arthur, and he was a creep from almost the very start. I know that the way he met me was strange enough. I left my apartment and was walking down the hallway. He came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder, startling me. Then he introduced himself, and it was really awkward. He told me that he lived next door and stuff, and from that point I thought maybe he was just an awkward guy. But he spoke to me a couple more times and didn't really seem shy or anything. In fact, the next time that I saw him, he was just standing out in the hallway, not really seeming to be going anywhere. When I left my place, he approached me and asked me if I wanted to come over to his place. I said that I was busy and I had to go somewhere, and I declined. After this, Arthur tried to ask me out a couple of times when he saw me in the hallway, but I said no each time. He struck me as a little bit odd and creepy. All of these interactions with him happened within the first month that he lived there. It was starting to get annoying, because it seemed like almost half the time that I left my place, he would leave after me or be in the hallway. Then, one night, I was in my apartment and went to take out my trash. We did not have a trash chute on my floor, and we had to walk all the way down to the basement to take it out. So I got on my flip-flops and left my place and walked down to the basement. I was gone for maybe 2 or 3 minutes at most. Then I returned to my apartment and went back inside of it. It was kind of late at this point, and I was tired, so I decided to get ready for bed. I wasn't necessarily planning to go to sleep right away, but probably just watch some shows in bed. So I started to go around and turn all the lights off in my place. When I passed by my broom closet, I was sure that I heard a noise inside of it. This was very weird. I didn't know what it could be. The last thing that I was expecting was for a person to be in there. But when I opened the door, I saw Arthur standing right inside. I jumped back and started running for my bedroom. Arthur emerged from the broom closet and then actually started going after me. After I got inside my bedroom, I slammed the door shut, but I didn't have enough time to lock it. Arthur was there within seconds, and I saw him starting to open the door. I had the half bathroom attached to my bedroom, and I ran for that door. I got inside and shut the door behind me just after Arthur had gotten inside of my bedroom. This door had a slightly different lock, and I was just able to lock it on time before Arthur reached. He then tried opening the door and then started banging on it. Fortunately, I had my cell phone in my pocket. I dialed 911 as fast as I could. Neither Arthur or me said anything in this time. After trying to open the bathroom door multiple times, Arthur then started banging on it. I finally spoke and yelled that I had called the police. Then I talked to the 911 operator. I told her exactly what was going on. In this time, Arthur finally walked away from the bathroom door. However, I couldn't tell if he had left my apartment or was just in the other room, so I stayed hidden in the bathroom. It felt like forever that I was waiting until the police showed up. In that time, I didn't hear anything, and when they got there, I finally came out of the bathroom, but Arthur was not in my apartment anywhere. I told the police where he lived, which was obviously right next door, but Arthur had left. Eventually, though, the police were able to locate him. Apparently, he had gotten into similar trouble in the past and had a bit of a history. I obviously didn't lock my door when I went to take out the trash that night. Arthur must have just walked right in and hid in my closet. I'm glad that I found him when I did, even though that made for one of the scariest moments of my life.
A couple of years ago, I moved into a duplex. I had just graduated from college and got my first job. It was a pretty decent neighborhood, and I was looking forward to starting a new chapter of my life. After I moved in, I met my next-door neighbor who lived on the other side of the duplex. He was a man named Rob and appeared to be in his 40s. He said he had been living there for 10 years, and he seemed like a pretty nice guy. He even helped me move a couple of my bigger furniture pieces into my house. The first couple of weeks went by really well. I liked my job a lot, and I was enjoying the house as well. One day, however, after work, I got a painting to hang up on my wall. There was a random screw in the wall of my bedroom, and I wanted to cover it up. The screw was pretty hard to see, but I still wanted to cover it up because I'm a perfectionist. When I got home, I went into my bedroom and positioned it against the wall to see what it would look like. But when I did, I got a closer look at the screw. I hadn't seen this before, but when I looked closer, it was actually a peephole. I looked through the peephole. I could barely see it, but I saw an eyeball looking back at me. I jumped back. The other side of my wall was my neighbor Rob. I ran and found some tape and quickly covered up the hole. Then I heard a knock at my door. I looked out my window to see Rob. I didn't want to answer it. I was way too creeped out. Then he tried opening the door. After a couple tries, he went back inside. I immediately called the owner of the property and told them the situation. They allowed me to get out of my lease and move out, which I did the very next day. I didn't see Rob the next day, and his car was gone. I'm glad, because I never want to see him again.
Several years ago, my job had me relocate for about a year. It's something that I've done a few times for work, and each time the company offers to find me a place, or gives me the option to find one on my own. I decided to just let them find me a place this time because I was really busy with work and didn't feel like the hassle of looking for a new house. They ended up giving me a pretty nice place in a city type of neighborhood. I liked the house and had no complaints about it at all. I quickly realized, though, that there seemed to be nobody living in the house next door to me. The lights were always off, and there was no cars in the driveway. The grass in the yard was also very overgrown. It was a bit of an eyesore to look at, but other than that, I really didn't care. I pretty much spent my time at work or just relaxing at home. One night, I got into my bedroom and was about to go to sleep when I glanced out my window. The window sort of lined up with the neighbor's window next door, and I noticed a man looking at me. We made eye contact for a split second, and then the man's head disappeared down into the dark room that he was in. This nearly gave me a heart attack because I was sure that nobody lived there. The man appeared to be somewhat old from what I had seen, but I really didn't get a great look at him. I didn't see anybody after that for about another week. But finally one day I saw an older man walk out of the front door to the side of the house. I watched him from my window as the man seemed to kind of just stare at the side of his house for a while, and then return back inside. I realized that I did in fact have a next door neighbor, but he just seemed to be kind of strange. I didn't see him much, but I occasionally saw him here and there over the next several weeks. He always seemed to be doing sort of strange things. One day I saw him go outside and walk into my yard. He appeared to just stare at my house for a couple of minutes. I almost went out and talked to him, but he kind of creeped me out, so I just watched him from the window. Eventually, he went back inside. The next day, I happened to see another one of my neighbors out getting mail, so I decided to go over and ask him about the man who lived next to me. But I was told that nobody lived in that house. My neighbor across the street told me that the house next door to me had been abandoned for almost 2 years. I got the chills when he said this. I told him what I had seen, and we both decided to call the police. They came and searched the property of the house next door, but didn't find anyone. I lived there for the rest of the year, and then I moved again. I never did see the man again, but sometimes I would think I heard noises coming from next door. I once had one of those moments that shakes your sense of security regarding neighbors. I was 25 at the time, living in a quiet neighborhood where I thought everybody looked out for each other. My neighbor who lived next door to me, let's call him Mike, was a middle-aged man in his 40s. He was friendly enough, and I would invite him to parties and he would join, occasionally bringing a six-pack or two. He had a son in the army, and we shared some light conversations about military life and local news. Really no warning signs that I could think of. One night, I had planned to go to a friend's house, but I forgot something that I was supposed to bring with me. After having just left my house, I had to turn back. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw a figure jumping over my fence from out of my backyard. I slowed down, watching closely. The figure darted behind Mike's barn, which was just a few feet from my yard. I sat in my car, waiting, unsure of what to do. After a moment, I got out, feeling an odd mix of anger and fear. After the person stayed hidden behind the barn, I got out of the car telling the person to reveal themselves, saying that I had a loaded firearm with me, which was actually a bluff since it was inside my house. In response, I saw Mike's silhouette rushing towards his back door. I knew it was him, and I could only think of what he might have been doing. I walked up to his front door and knocked. He opened the door with a look of confusion, asking what was going on. I confronted him about being in my backyard and what in the world he was doing back there. He still played the confused part, saying he had been inside all night long. I wasn't too mad at first and tried telling him that if he ever wanted to hang out, just call me and ask or come knock on the door. However, Mike stayed in denial and began yelling insults and slurs at me. I think he was drunk too. No idea what he was doing jumping over my fence, but I knew for a fact it had been him, so I wasn't going to take any risks in the future. I told him that I kept my firearm close inside the house, and if I ever heard somebody attempting to enter my house, I wouldn't hesitate to shoot. After that night, he never spoke to me again. He also began watching me more closely than normal. I would see him peering out from behind his curtains, and every time I'd arrive back home from somewhere, I'd be nervous that Mike would be inside my house.
Months later, he moved away, and it was a relief to not have to worry about my neighbor anymore. This is a story about my strange experiences with an old neighbor. It all started about 5 years ago. I moved into a standard house in what I thought was a really nice neighborhood, and it was for the most part. Everybody that I met around my street was really nice, but my next door neighbor to the west, I never met. From the time I moved in, I would rarely see anybody outside on his property, and things around the yard were really simple. Still, I knew that somebody lived there because there was always a car in the driveway. But overall, I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to what my neighbors were doing. One day though, I was outside getting my mail. After I got the mail from the mailbox and was starting to walk back up the driveway, I noticed my next door neighbor. He was standing at one of his front windows of his house and was just staring at me. He appeared to be looking right at me, almost glaring. It was really awkward, and I looked away and to the letters of mail that I had in my hands. But after traveling a few steps up my driveway, I had to look again. He was still looking at me, and he almost looked angry. I smiled and waved at him. I kind of expected him to at least wave back a little, but he just kept staring at me as I walked all the way to my house. That was a really strange first interaction with my next door neighbor, I thought. It had already been about 6 months since I moved in, and this is the first time that I had seen him. I thought that the guy must just be really unfriendly, or he was just weird, or maybe he disliked me for some reason, although I had no idea why he would dislike me. It's not like I played loud music or had parties at my house. I couldn't think of any reason why. It didn't really bother me too much though. Sometimes people are unfriendly. What are you gonna do? Probably about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks went by since I had first seen my neighbor before I saw him again. The next time I saw him was when I was getting home one night. It was like 10 p.m. and dark out. I saw my neighbor standing at his window again, staring at me, just like the previous time. I saw him as I got out of my car, and then I didn't look at him again until I was at my front door. When I looked back, he was still staring at me. That was only the second time that I noticed him, but he sure seemed strange to me. After going inside, I went to bed maybe an hour later. I woke up in the middle of the night though. I just remember that when I woke up, I was really thirsty and it was almost 4 a.m. Occasionally, I wake up in the night really dehydrated, and then I just drink some water and go back to sleep. This night, I didn't have any water in my bedroom, so I got up to go to the kitchen. When I was on my way there, I passed by the living room window. My neighbor was standing in my front yard, staring right into my window. It was the same stare that he always had, and he was maybe 10 feet away from the window. I will never forget the feeling of shock that I had when I saw him. It was terrifying. I ran out of sight of the window. When I got to my kitchen, I remember that I was pacing around wondering what on earth my neighbor was doing. After a couple of minutes, I felt better. I got some water and decided to go back and see if my neighbor was still there. When I returned, he was gone. I walked around every window of my house looking outside, but I didn't see my neighbor at all anymore. After that, I went back to sleep, although it took me a while. The next day, I was still thinking about it and decided that I was going to go over and talk to my neighbor. I really didn't want to, but at the same time, I felt that I should. When I walked into his front yard, he was not looking out of the window or staring at me. I knocked on his door, and he didn't answer at first. The car was in his driveway though, so I knew that he was home. I stayed on the front step and rang the doorbell this time. Finally, the door opened. I saw my neighbor, the same guy who had been looking into my window the previous night. I smiled and offered out my hand for him to shake, and I introduced myself. He didn't shake my hand though, and just asked me what I wanted. I told him that I thought I saw him in my front yard the previous night, and I was wondering what he was doing. He denied it, cursed at me, and then slammed the door in my face. I walked back to my house. I only saw him one other time. About a month after this took place, I saw a moving truck in his driveway and moving guys loading up some furniture. I saw my neighbor with them as well, and I gathered that he was moving. I can't say that I miss him at all, but I'm still left with questions about what he was doing. I also wonder if that's the only time he stared into my windows. This happened to me while I was in middle school. For background, we used to live in a crappy and old house in a crappy and old neighborhood. Our house had 2 types of fences. In the very back of our backyard was a tall wooden fence, and in the front and sides of the house was a generic white picket fence. The first year that we lived there, it was very quiet. We never saw many neighbors around and rarely heard anything. This changed, however, when I began to hear knocking at my window. This happened for a couple of weeks, and every time I told my parents, they didn't believe me. So I used to think our house was haunted. It creaked a lot, and I always heard weird noises which I counted as evidence. The knocking continued to get worse over the weeks. I remembered thinking that the knocking was coming from the mirror in my room, because it was so loud it sounded like it was coming from my room. I had 2 windows in my room, one above my nightstand and the other was right beside my bed. The knocking only came from the one above my nightstand. The window beside my bed had a giant metal AC unit underneath it with loud fans on it, and the other window had bushes below it. Looking back years later, it makes sense why it was only coming from the window near my nightstand with the bushes below it. At this point, I had confided in my younger sister about it, since my parents didn't believe me. I found out that she also heard loud knocking coming from her own windows. I did tell my parents that we both heard noises, and my dad said that he had investigated but didn't find anything. There was one night I remember very vividly. I had managed to make a pillow fort in my room, with chairs and sheets, and had been sleeping in it this night. It was late summer, and I couldn't sleep, so I watched YouTube in my fort. I had eventually put away my phone on my nightstand, rolled over, and tried to fall asleep. That was when the soft tapping on my window started. I was used to it at this point, but I was still terrified. I laid still and waited for it to go away, but it didn't. The tapping turned into loud knocks, then soon into pounding at my window. I refused to move, and at this point I was crying. I thought the glass was going to shatter from how hard the pounding on my window had been. I had heard my window shaking as it proceeded. Eventually, it stopped. I don't know how my parents didn't hear anything. Over those few weeks, the knocking had seemed to somewhat stop, but this only led to weirder things happening. I remember looking at the bushes that were shifted weirdly under my window, and I guess that's when it really hit me that a person had been doing this, not some ghost. Other weird things had happened also. There was one night where my family had gotten home late, and I remember like straight out of a horror movie, in the large bushes under my sister's window I had heard a phone go off. It was pitch dark outside, so I didn't see anybody at all, but I am sure that I did hear a phone ring. This also happened again later, as I heard a phone notification ding under my window a few nights later while I was in bed. Random rocks and marbles would show up outside of our house. Outside in front of our garage we used to find large rocks, the kind you would find at a playground. Our house did not have any of them, and along with those we would find small marbles. The reason I point at my neighbor for doing all this is because he was the only neighbor we would ever see. It was rare to see him, but usually he would just be in his yard. If I had seen him or he caught me looking at him, he would move out of sight behind our larger wood fences. There was one specific day where he had really scared my sister and me. My dad had left for something, and my mom, sister, and I were the only people home. Us kids were sitting on the back porch swing as we did regularly almost. We were talking as the sun began to set. We faced towards our white fences, and at this moment I had been looking around the yard. That's when I saw him, our neighbor at the fence, peering over and watching us. I tried to ignore him until he started walking along the white fence. He paced back and forth beside our fence, watching us, not speaking. He did this for a couple of minutes before our mother noticed, I guess through the window. She made us come inside and stayed at our glass back door to watch him. He kept pacing, and after a while of him doing this and showing no signs of stopping, my mother called our grandfather to come over and my dad to come back home. Once my grandfather showed up, the neighbor left and went back into his house. After this, we didn't hear much from him. We did hear occasional knocks or did find rocks, but other than that, he stayed quiet. My fear about our neighbor being the stalker was confirmed after we had moved. The family that moved in after us had 2 sons, and I believe they were both about the same age as my sister and me. The new residents reported that once their oldest son had accidentally thrown away something and gone to find it in the garbage outside. The next morning they got a letter on the front porch, not in the mailbox. It read something along the lines of, "I saw your son last night digging through the trash. You should tell him to be more careful. You don't know who is watching." The letter was signed by the next door neighbor. I told my parents about this, and apparently the family had been experiencing similar things like I did when we lived there. It does freak me out to think about how my parents did not believe us, only for them to be proven wrong by the next family that moved in. This is something that happened many years ago when I was a kid. I think I was around 12 years old. I just remember that one day there was some type of problem at my middle school. I think the electricity in the building went out or something, and it had to be fixed. So we got out of school for the day, and I got to stay home. But we went back the following day. However, it was really nice to have a random day off like that. My older brother was in high school, so he still had to go, and my parents both had work. So on that day that I had off, I was left home alone that day. I had already woke up early as I was expecting to go to school, and after everybody left, I wasn't tired right away. So I went into the living room and I sat on the couch and just started watching TV. Probably about an hour into my unexpected day off, I heard something from outside. It sounded like footsteps of somebody right outside our house, like they were going to the front door. I looked over out the window from where I was on the couch. From there, I could see a man who was our next door neighbor. He lived in the house just to the left of ours, and I had never talked to him or anything, but I had seen him a few times and I knew who he was. I saw him go up to our front step and figured that he was going to knock on the door. I didn't feel like answering it though, and I figured that I would be no help, so I didn't have plans to answer the door. He probably wanted my parents anyways. However, he did not knock on the door. I saw him walk up to the door and stand there, and then he tried to open it. I was sitting in a spot that he probably could not see me at, and he didn't look in my direction either. In fact, I could barely see him from where he was next to the door, but I heard him try to open it. This was pretty weird. Then I heard him walking away. At that point, I was confused, so I got up and went over to the door. I looked out, and I thought that I would see him walking back to his house. But no. Instead, he walked around our house like he was going to the backyard. Then I moved to a rear window, and I was careful not to let him see me. Our next door neighbor then went into our backyard. He walked over to the back door to our house and then tried to open it. That one was also locked though. I was really confused as to what he was doing. He then walked around a bit in our backyard and was looking at the house. After standing there momentarily, he walked over to a window. I thought that he might try to break it or something, and I was getting really freaked out by this. He walked up to the window and appeared to look in. I ducked down so as to not be seen, even though I was at a different window. I didn't hear anything then, but when I looked back, he wasn't at the window anymore. I saw him then casually walking back to his house, and then he went inside. For the rest of the time that I was home alone that day, he did not return, and I didn't see him outside or anything. Eventually, my brother got home from school, and my parents got home from work. I told them about it, and they thought it was really weird, but didn't seem to take it that serious. They chalked it up to maybe he was just wondering if anybody was home and wanted to borrow something. They didn't believe that he actually tried to open the door. Although my parents were not that close with our neighbor, they talked to him several times and felt that he wouldn't do something like that. After that event, I'm not aware of anything else like it happening. The man moved out like a few years later. I don't think he ever did anything like that again, but I know what I saw and I know what I heard, and I still don't know why he did that. I'm assuming that he just didn't know that I was home and thought that the house was empty. I just don't know why he would try to break in like that.
This story took place last summer. I live by myself in a small house, and it's in a pretty big neighborhood where the houses are sort of close together, so I get to know most of my neighbors. The house next door to me to the west was for sale, and finally somebody bought it. I saw that a middle-aged guy moved into the house, but beyond that, I didn't know much. As the time went by after that, the guy seemed sort of creepy and elusive. He always had an angry look on his face and rarely came outside. When he did, he would just sort of stand outside and look around, or get his mail. I tried to have conversations with him a couple of times to be friendly, but they were quickly shut down. For the most part, I just tried to give the guy his privacy and figured he just liked to be alone. Then one night, I woke up at 3 a.m. and was very thirsty. I went into my kitchen to get some water. As I did, I noticed that the neighbor was outside, sort of between my house and his, and seemed to be pacing back and forth. This was strange to see as it was the middle of the night. The guy then went back inside and came out less than a minute later. He then looked up at me and we made eye contact. The man looked really surprised and then walked quickly back inside. It felt really awkward to me that he had seen me staring at him. I went back to bed. By the next day, I had forgotten all about it. I didn't see the man at all that day. The next night, I once again awoke at 3 o'clock in the morning. This time, I wasn't as thirsty though. I sat up in bed and looked at the time, then I rolled back over to my other side to get some more sleep. But as soon as I laid down, I heard a noise.
It was a very small noise of something touching my window, then sat back up again. I listened closely, and it sounded like there was a light tapping coming from my bedroom window. Then came a noise which was much louder than the others. I reached for my light switch and turned my light on. It revealed a silhouette of a man coming from behind the blinds outside my bedroom window. Whoever it was quickly ran away and went out of sight. I got up and walked around the house after that and looked out of all of my windows, but I didn't see anything strange. Then I went back up to my bedroom, and it took a while before I was able to fall back asleep. The next day, I went all around my yard and looked for any evidence if it was there the night before. Couldn't really find anything though. After that day though, I never saw my next door neighbor again. He must have left without anybody noticing, because a couple of months later, we just saw a for sale sign on the house and learned that the guy who lived there hadn't been there at all for months. I think it was him who I saw outside my bedroom window, but I don't know why he was there or what he was doing. I'm a female and recently graduated from college. This story happened to me last year when I first got my degree and started my real job. I moved into the city and got an apartment that I really liked. It was right near downtown and I could walk to lots of places. The apartment building itself was rather large and had many people living there on several floors, but it was very nice inside and came with furniture. I remember when I first got done moving in, my neighbor from across the hall came over and introduced himself as Carl. Right away, he kind of gave me the creeps. He just seemed a little bit off. He asked me a few questions about myself and then basically asked me out within 5 minutes of meeting. I politely said no, but he didn't seem too happy about it. Over the first few months of living there, he always seemed to leave his apartment at the same time as me. He would always say hi and ask me where I was going. I like when people are friendly, but the way he would say things was just borderline creepy, but I tried to be nice about it overall. Eventually, though, it just became too much, and I would kind of try to avoid him. Then one night, as I was eating in my living room by myself, I heard a small noise outside my door. I quietly got up and walked over to it, trying not to make a sound. I looked out at my peephole and saw Carl crouched down on the floor looking at my front door. I wasn't really sure what he was trying to do, if he was planning to open the door or if he was trying to eavesdrop on me, but it was very creepy either way. Finally, after about a minute, he left. This had become a little bit too much, and I considered reporting him or even moving. The next day, I had my friend over after work, and we hung out in my apartment for a bit. Then we both went out to the parking garage where we said goodbye. I went back up to my apartment after that. When I got back inside, I was getting some water when I heard a noise coming from the hallway. I couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from, so I walked over to see. I looked around but didn't really see anything at all. I even went into my bedroom and looked around. Then I knew I heard the sound of footsteps coming from inside my living room, so I ran to my bedroom door and shut it. Thankfully, it had a lock on it. I locked the door, then I heard footsteps coming towards it, and Carl's voice asked me to come out. I was silent and dialed 911 on my phone. Carl then tried to open the door, but once he realized it was locked, he called out saying he was strong and he knew he would be able to break the door down, so I should just come out. I didn't doubt that he could because it was a pretty weak door. With 911 on the phone, I opened my window and went for the fire escape. I tried to do it as quietly as I could. Once I got the window open and was going out, I heard Carl start shouting and banging on the door. I climbed out and was able to make it down. Then I ran across the street to a local supermarket. I waited there until the police showed up and arrested Carl. He had been able to sneak into my apartment because I had forgot to lock it when I went to the parking garage.
I live alone in a house. I've only lived here for a couple of years, and I would describe the neighborhood as quiet. There are a lot of other houses around, and most of the neighbors are very nice. Well, last year, I had hardly ever seen my next-door neighbor to the west. Only once or twice did I ever notice her. As far as I knew, there was just one woman who lived there. Her yard was right next to mine, so I would have been able to see if she ever went outside, but I never did. It was a little bit mysterious, but not something that seemed that crazy. Well, one night I was home and it was pretty late. Before bed, I was getting my things ready for the next day. I realized that I couldn't find my wallet. After looking around for a few minutes, I thought that maybe I forgot it in my car. Sometimes it would fall out of my pocket. My car was parked in the driveway, so I left my house and walked outside. It was very dark and quiet. I went out to my car and opened up the driver's door, and sure enough, my wallet was sitting there on the seat. So I picked it up and then started to head back inside. But as I did, I noticed that my next door neighbor was outside. She was standing in her yard, not that far away, and kind of looking at me. It seemed kind of weird to be out this late, and I didn't really know what she was doing. I just turned and walked back up my driveway to the house. Then I went back inside. As I got back into the kitchen, I put my wallet back on the counter where I usually kept it. Then I was going to head into the other room. Except that's when I noticed out the window that my neighbor was now in my yard. She had seemingly walked over and was now right next to the driveway. I was wondering what exactly she was doing over here. Then I watched as she walked right up to my window. She then went right up next to it and started looking inside of my house. It was really strange. She didn't wave at me or anything, but appeared to be looking in my direction. Then she moved down really quick. I didn't know what to make of it, so I left the room. But a few minutes later, I went back into the kitchen to see if she had in fact left, but she didn't. She was now standing at another window and looking in. I didn't know if she could see me or not. I wasn't that close to the window, and when I noticed her, I sort of moved back and around the corner. I watched her, and she was just staring into the window. She kept looking in for like 5 minutes straight. Then, finally, she moved away. After that, I went over to the window, and I watched her going back into her yard and then back inside of her house. I was so confused by this whole situation. After that, I just went to bed though. I didn't really know what to do. And I didn't see my neighbor for months after that. Since then, I've only seen her a couple of times. I've never brought up what happened. I still don't know what she was doing.
I live in what I've always considered to be a quiet and safe neighborhood. Nothing much seems to happen here. The houses are slightly spread out, and it's not quite out in the country, but not that close to the city either. I know most of the neighbors, and I'm friends with a good amount of them. A few years ago, I was at home with my wife, and it got to be late. The weather was nice, and I had been doing a little bit of work out in the garage. Nothing that crazy, just messing around with some old junk. I left the door open because I had many times before, and nothing had ever happened. When I was inside and it was getting pretty late, like after 10 p.m., I heard my wife say something. She said that it looked like Jeff was coming over. He's a neighbor that lived a short ways down the street. I knew him decently well, and I had talked to him many times before. Occasionally, we would stop by each other's places if we saw each other outside working on something or something like that. I went over to the window and wondered why he would be coming over so late at night. I watched Jeff walk up the driveway, but instead of going and turning to go to the front door, he went straight. This led him straight towards the garage and out of my sight. I thought that he must have been thinking I was still in the garage, so I went to get my shoes on and go outside. Within probably a minute, I left the house. I walked over to the garage, but when I got there, Jeff was gone. He was not in the garage and was nowhere in sight. I called out but got no response. It was so strange because I knew that I had just seen him walk up my driveway. I went in the backyard and then went back to the front, and he just wasn't there. But then, after going back in the garage, I noticed something. A few of my things were gone. Could Jeff have stolen them? Nothing else made any sense. I went back inside and told my wife about the crazy situation. She didn't know what to make of it. I decided to go over and talk to Jeff the following day. So the next day, I went to his house and knocked on the door, but he did not answer. I was a little suspicious, but maybe he just wasn't home. After that, though, I was always sure to close my garage. So sometime, maybe a week later or so, I happened to notice Jeff outside. I walked up and approached him, and he seemed normal at first. I told him how I saw him walking up my driveway the other night, but he completely denied it. I told him he took my stuff, but he denied that too. He said that he thought I must be joking. To be nice, I said I must be mistaken then, and then I left. I didn't want to get into a big argument with my neighbor. I didn't think it was worth it. The stuff that he'd stolen was valuable, but not that valuable. I wasn't that desperate to get it back. So I went back home, and since then, we haven't spoken. I know he took my stuff. I think he saw the garage door open, thought that I had gone to bed, and simply walked in and took it. But to be safe and avoid being seen, he left the garage through the back door and then cut through my neighbor's yard to go back home. It's pretty crazy how he did that. I'm hoping that nothing more like that happens, but I'm going to be careful around him.
It was a weekend in 2018, and I figured it would be a good idea to go out of town for the day and introduce my girlfriend to my mom for the first time. My mom lives out in the plains on 40 acres of land. The house and land are about 1/4 mile off the road into the field, with our long driveway dividing the land of two neighbors. We arrived around noon, and my brother and his wife also happened to be out there visiting that day, so I introduced the girlfriend to everyone and all the dogs. I noticed though that the loudest and most obnoxious dog, the beagle, didn't come greet us. My mom explained that the previous night she went to grab something from the truck, and on her way in the dog darted out the door and ran off into the field and still hadn't come back yet. This isn't all that uncommon for a dog to run off in the night and come back a couple of days later living out in the country like this. Later that day, my mom recalled to everyone that her and my nieces were woken up at around 1 a.m. to all the dogs howling and barking non-stop and just going nuts. Eventually they stopped and everybody went back to sleep. We continued to have a nice quiet day out in the middle of nowhere for a few more hours when we noticed that this hawk had been flying around the same spot all day in the field, so my brother and his wife went to check it out. A few minutes later my brother came back and told me that he found the missing beagle, but something was wrong and that I should go check it out before telling my mom. I followed my brother into the field expecting to find a dead dog. As we were walking, I saw a spot of blood and thought that it was probably coyotes. He showed me a trail of blood that led to a larger puddle and another trail. The dog seemed to have been drug around a bit. As soon as I saw the dog, something looked wrong about the scene, and the plants around him were trampled and something looked different. I took a few more steps and realized that he was missing skin. This wasn't just a few bits missing from a fight or birds pecking at him though. The only fur and skin left on him was the head, tail, and paws. They were very distinguished straight lines indicating that he had been skinned. Some sick person had killed, skinned, and taken a pelt of our dog in the middle of the night, only a couple of 100 feet from our front door. My mom suspects our neighbor, who she always has been creeped out by, because she's seen him skinning animals that he hunted before, such as rabbits. It seems like way too much of a coincidence for my mom's neighbor not to have been the one who did this to our dog. Of course we called the cops, who took pictures and looked around the area and noticed tire tracks, but couldn't tell how old they were. They also found a pile of fresh horse manure that looked fresh close by. It looked like whoever did this rode a horse out there, and that same neighbor does own horses on his property also. To this day, the cops have never followed up with anything, and nothing else has happened yet, even though my mom explained the neighbor's tendencies to the police. Nature cams were installed since then, and fences have been mended so our dogs can't get out. So at least we know it won't happen again, and if it does, something will be caught on camera.
Last year, we had a new neighbor move in next door. From the very first day he moved in, he gave me the creeps. He was in his 50s and looked kind of sloppy. He had a beard, gray hair, and wore baggy clothes. He just seemed a little odd and wasn't very friendly. My parents and I talked to him the day he moved in, and he just seemed like he was in a bad mood. The first couple of months he lived there, I didn't see him go outside at all. Somebody would come over and mow his lawn for him every week. I never even saw him getting the mail. I would occasionally just see his car leaving the house or arriving. One night, I was up late playing video games in the living room. I thought I heard something outside our window. I looked out the window to see the bushes moving and the back of someone walking away. I stood there just staring at the man. As he walked away, I could see it was our next door neighbor. I don't think he saw me because he never turned around. I moved to the other window to get a better look, and I could see that it was clearly our next-door neighbor. He just walked back into his yard. I told my dad about it, and he went outside to see. My dad came back about 10 minutes later. He said he asked our neighbor if he'd been in our yard, but he denied it and got mad that my dad accused him of it. I know 100% that was him. A few days later, when I was taking the garbage down to the street, I saw the man in his window just staring at me. He had a mad look on his face, and he didn't take his eyes off me the whole time. I don't know what this guy's problem is, but I don't feel comfortable living next to him. A few weeks ago, I went to drop my friend off at his house. I pulled over to the side of the road to let him out. His neighborhood was pretty quiet because it was about midnight. Right as my friend was about to get out of my car, we noticed a car that was parked on the side of the road go into the neighbor's yard and then into their backyard. We found this really odd, and my friend stayed in my car to see what would happen. We then saw lights turn on behind the house, and then a shadow on the house next to it appeared. We could see the shadow of the man, and it started making movements. After trying to figure out what he was doing, we decided that it looked like he was digging a hole in his yard. This was a pretty odd activity for midnight, and my friend and I were suddenly very interested into what was going on. After about 10 minutes, the activity stopped, and we saw somebody walk to the driveway and into a car, and then back inside. I couldn't make out what they looked like because it was so dark out. After about 5 minutes, somebody came to the end of the driveway and looked directly at us and then walked back inside. We were very confused by this whole situation. About another 10 minutes went by, and somebody then came to the end of the driveway again and started staring at us. Then they started walking towards us. I put the car in reverse, backed up, turned around, and drove out of there to my house. My friend slept at my place that night. The creepy part about this is the next day when we went back, their house was completely vacant, and my friend hasn't seen anyone there since.
This is something that happened when I was a kid. I lived with my parents and my younger sister. At the time of this story, I was probably like 12 or 13, and the neighborhood that we lived in had a little bit more land. The backyards of all of the houses were kind of large, but the houses were still fairly close to each other. I knew a few of the neighbors, but didn't know any of them very well. There was one house sort of close to us that was next door to the west. Both our house and theirs had decks in the back, and the one next door was kind of small. I remember that I would go outside in the backyard a lot because I was a kid. I would practice playing sports back there and things like that. One time, I remember that I went outside, and I saw the woman who lived next door out on her deck. She was pretty far away, and it was kind of hard to see. It looked like she had binoculars and was looking right at me with them, though, and this seemed a little bit strange. I think it was just her and her husband who lived next door. They didn't seem to go outside much, and we rarely saw them. They also didn't seem to be very friendly. I know that every Halloween we would go to their house, and they would never answer the door. I ignored what appeared to be her looking at me and kept doing what I was doing. I think I was practicing some frisbee golf shots or something like that. I looked up again a while later, and she was still there facing me with the binoculars. It seemed so strange that I just stopped and stared at her to see if I was seeing correctly. She did not move. The woman was just steps from the door to go back inside. I went back to doing what I was doing and looked again a few minutes later. This time, she was gone. I was glad to see that, and I stayed outside for a while. Back then, I was outside basically every day. I'm not sure if it was the next day or a few days later though, but I soon saw her again. This time, I was in the backyard once more, but the woman was inside of her house. She was at a window, and I don't know which room it was, but it was a window on her house on the second floor. It looked sort of out to our backyard. I'm not even sure how I saw it, because it's kind of hard to see in, but I saw her again. She had binoculars on once more, and appeared to be looking at me with them. Now, our backyard wasn't that interesting. I had no clue as to why she would be looking out into our backyard. If she was just watching me specifically, then I found that very odd. I stopped and stared at her again. I wasn't necessarily mad or annoyed with her, but I was just confused. I wanted to know what she was doing and if she was looking at me. She stayed there, staring at me, and I stared at her. She barely moved at all. This went on for like a minute or two straight. Then, finally, I saw her move out of the way from the window. I went back to playing out in the yard after that. Now, each time that this happened, I never told my parents or anybody about it. It didn't seem like that big of a deal, and by the time I would come inside, I would have usually forgotten all about it. But a while after this, maybe a week or so, I really don't know, I happened to be outside pretty late one night. It was maybe like 11 p.m. or something. It was summertime, so I would stay up later, and this also meant that it was nice outside. Now, people were using both of the bathrooms that we had in our house. I really had to go, and being a guy, when this happened, I would sometimes go out in the backyard. Even though it was really late at night, I went downstairs and then out the back door to the backyard. Then I was going to go behind this one tree that we had, but before I got a chance to even walk out to the tree, I saw something. I looked over and noticed a woman stepping out onto her deck. She then put the binoculars up to her face and appeared to look over at me. She was literally right outside of the door leading to their deck. This late at night, that was really odd. I just turned around and ran back inside. It creeped me out, and I just waited to use the bathroom after that. There was no way I was going to go back outside. Still, I forgot to tell anybody. I'm not really sure how I did, but I just did. So that night, I went to bed. My bedroom happened to be down in the basement. Our house was a split level, with 2 bedrooms upstairs and 2 bedrooms downstairs. My bedroom was partly underground and had a window that looked outside. After going to bed, I fell asleep rather quickly, but at some point, I woke up. When I did, I just remembered that I could tell it was still the middle of the night. I heard a noise coming from my window, and I looked over. I was expecting to see nothing. Maybe it was a bug flying against the window with it being summertime. But what I saw was the woman literally standing right outside of my window and looking in at me. It was the craziest sight I had ever seen. I'm pretty sure I rolled off my bed to the other side away from the window and onto the carpet. Then I hid behind my bed. I didn't want to look back to the window. I stayed there for a while, and when I was finally able to look up again, she was gone. I went upstairs and told my parents about it, and the next day, my dad went over to confront them. Her husband answered the door and denied everything. He said that we were crazy, and the husband was really mad about the accusation. My dad ended up cursing him out and then leaving. The woman never even came to the door. But after that confrontation, she never did anything strange like that again. I did see her a couple of times, but she wasn't doing anything weird when I did. Those people moved away like a year later, and a new family moved in. I still think about how bizarre that situation was, though, sometimes.
This is a story that's kind of collective. It's something that happened in my neighborhood about a year ago. It's a small, tight-knit community where we all participate in a neighborhood watch. Everyone is in this group chat, and there isn't a single person who's not involved. We typically don't have any wild situations, just small things like, hey, there's going to be a storm tomorrow, or someone left their tricycle out. You know, the kinds of things that make parents' lives a little less stressful. Honestly, the group is pretty trustworthy and cool. I like it a lot. All the families are in it, about 65 people in total, which is quite a few. We watch out for each other, and it feels like a little community. One day, though, everything changed. Up until then, we'd never had a scare, but someone reported seeing a strange vehicle just sitting on the side of the road. Like I said, we knew everyone in the neighborhood and in the group chat, so we immediately knew this person wasn't from our area. Maybe they were just passing through or admiring the nice houses. We live in a fairly wealthy area, but it seems suspicious. We reported in the chat and decided to keep an eye out. The next night, the same car was spotted in the same place. Now we were all wondering what was going on. One of the parents, Sam, decided to walk up to the car and ask the person what they were doing. But as he approached, the car drove off. Very suspicious if you ask me. At this point, we were on high alert. Everyone was worried, especially about the kids. We didn't know if this person was a kidnapper or a stalker. Nobody had any idea. The following night, the car was spotted again, but this time in a different part of the neighborhood. Someone typed in the group chat, "The car is back. Has anyone else seen it?" Sam, the same person who had approached the car before, confirmed he'd seen it too. He told everyone, "Don't let them leave. Don't approach. I'm on my way." Sam was determined to get justice and figure out what this person was doing. Sam went over to the car, and the group chat blew up. Everyone was watching the situation unfold. It was honestly a bit dramatic, but also kind of entertaining in a weird way. Someone even started live streaming it for evidence, just in case anything happened. Sam approached the car. It was dark, and there weren't many streetlights, so we couldn't see much on the live stream. But then, out of nowhere, we saw Sam get punched in the face. He went down hard and got the living crap beaten out of him. Honestly, I didn't like Sam, so I thought it was kind of funny. He was always hating on people who were successful and lying about things, so I wasn't exactly feeling that sorry for him. The group chat went from entertained to panicked though. People tried calling the cops, but the live stream ended abruptly when the person's phone died. Can you believe that? No evidence, no video, nothing. I probably should have recorded it myself, but I was too caught up in watching. Sam, meanwhile, got absolutely destroyed. It was brutal. Now we have a real problem on our hands. There was a violent person lurking in the neighborhood, and no one knew who they were. The cops didn't have enough to go on because we couldn't provide any solid evidence, and nobody ever got a good look at the license plate of the car. The quality of the video was not good enough, and nobody remembered, so it became up to the neighborhood watch to figure it out. We split into 3 groups across the 65 people and came up with a plan. If the car showed up again, we'd approach it with 2 people at a time or call the cops immediately. But we also wanted to handle it ourselves because honestly the local cops didn't seem to care about it as much as us. We waited and waited for weeks. Then one night around 6 p.m. it happened. Someone spotted the car and sent a photo in the group chat. Everyone sprang into action, ready to execute the plan. But before anyone could approach, another message came in. A second car had been spotted in a different location. Then 2 more cars appeared. Now there were 4 cars spread across the neighborhood. At this point, our whole plan was useless. We had no idea what was going on. Were they planning a raid? Did they have weapons? We didn't know, but we knew they were violent. Against everyone's better judgment, Sam decided to approach one of the cars again, and this time he got shot in the leg. Everyone in the group chat was freaking out, locking their doors and calling the police. It's a gated community, so we couldn't figure out how these cars even got in. But then some of the kids in the group started noticing something weird. One of the group chat members, Lucas, hadn't spoken in weeks. The kids were convinced Lucas had something to do with it, even though the adults didn't believe them. Lucas was well liked, but the kids knew better. Eventually, the cops shut the gate down and came to investigate. Sure enough, Lucas was caught in one of the cars. It turned out he'd been orchestrating a massive robbery. He and his accomplices planned to hit every house in the neighborhood, stealing jewelry and valuables. Because Lucas was in the group chat, he knew exactly who had money and where people hid their valuables. The whole thing unfolded over 3 months because police investigations take forever, but in the end, the robbery failed. It's crazy to think one of our own neighbors tried to pull off a heist like that. Anyway, I'm just glad it's over, and honestly, I'm still laughing about Sam getting shot in the leg and left outside on someone's lawn, and he has made a full recovery. For a little background to this story, I was a young woman at the time living in my second apartment since graduating college. This place was a lot nicer than my first, which had been kind of a dump, so I was very excited to move into a much nicer building. This one was only a few years old and costed a lot more than my old place. I had gotten a pretty good job the previous year though, so I was finally able to afford it. It was an apartment complex of several buildings all next to each other. My place was on the 3rd floor of the second building. I got moved in and then settled in pretty quickly. I was really enjoying living in a decent apartment building. Then, about just a week or 2 into living there, I came home from work one day to find an envelope on my door. It was kind of shoved in the crack between the door and the frame. I figured that it was something from management, but I didn't know what. I took it and went inside. However, when I opened the envelope, there was a handwritten note inside. It said something like, "Welcome to the apartment. It's great to have you here. I hope you enjoy it. From your neighbor." When I read it, I thought that it was really nice, and I figured it was probably from one of my next door neighbors or maybe my neighbor across the hallway. It did not say who it was from, though, which I found a little bit strange. Nevertheless, I was glad to live in a place with such welcoming people, although to that point I had not met anybody else there yet. A couple of days later, I was leaving for work, and I happened to see a neighbor leaving her apartment as well. It was an older woman, and I thought that maybe she had written the note. So I said hi to her and asked her, but she said that she did not. I asked her if she knew who did, but she didn't know. It was kind of a mystery, but overall not too big of a deal. A few days after this, I got another note though. I once again came home to find a note on my door, and when I read this one, it was an invitation to meet. The note said something like, "I'd love to have you over for some coffee to welcome you to the building." Then it gave their apartment number. Now, for some reason, I was under the impression that it was maybe an older woman or just a woman in general. The way that it was written and the handwriting style and all that gave me the impression. Plus, the paper that it was written on had flower designs on it. The letter also said that I could drop by any time. So based on the fact that this person kept sending me notes, it seemed like they wanted to meet me. I wasn't sure why they hadn't just knocked on my door themselves when I was home. But anyways, one evening I went to go say hi and introduce myself. However, it was really strange, because their apartment number was not by mine at all. In fact, it wasn't even on my floor. It was located on the first floor and on the complete opposite end of the building. It was almost as far as you could possibly be from my place. So how on earth did this person ever even see me or know who I was and where I lived? Still, I knocked on the door. Soon after, a man answered. I was surprised to see him, as like I said, I thought it would be a woman. He invited me inside, and I instantly got a bad vibe from him. He was sort of short and had an uneven beard. I asked him if he was the one who left the notes, and he said yes. I told him thanks, and that it was very nice, and I had wanted to meet the person who had wrote them. He said that I should sit down and make myself at home, and he would get me a drink. I said that I was on my way out, which I had made up on the spot. He seemed upset by that, and I caved and said that I would stay for just a couple of minutes. So I sat down in his place, which seemed pretty average. I was kind of curious as to why he left the note. I asked him how long he had lived there and how he had noticed me because my apartment was so far from his. The guy claimed that he had lived there for years, and he welcomed everyone new into the building, which made me feel a bit better. Then he asked me how I liked working at my job, and then mentioned the exact company that I worked for. I had no idea how he would know this information. There would be literally no way to know that at all. I played it off and I just said that it was good and then said that I had to be going. That really creeped me out how he knew that. The man seemed disappointed that I said I had to go, but I didn't care. I left and then went back to my place. I got back to my apartment and hoped that I would not get any more notes and would never run into that guy again. He really gave me the creeps. About a week went by and nothing happened. I had mostly forgot about the whole thing. But then, one night, I was at home by myself and it was pretty late. Things were quiet and I heard someone walking down the hallway. I thought nothing of it, as this was obviously an everyday occurrence. However, the footsteps seemed to stop right outside my door. Sure, it could have been the neighbor across the hallway, which I figured it was, but I didn't hear a door open. It was like the footsteps just stopped. So I was curious, and I quietly tiptoed over to the door. Then I looked through the peephole. When I did, I saw that same man standing there outside my door. He was just looking at the door like he was debating whether to knock on it or try opening it or something. It was locked, but the man did not try to open it. Instead, I saw him lean in and put his ear to the door as if to try to listen. I kept still and literally held my breath. I didn't think he knew I was right on the other side, but I didn't know for sure. For the next minute or so, it was just him and I, not moving or making a sound. Then, finally, he backed up. I saw him walk away down the hallway a few seconds later. I finally could relax a little bit. I considered reporting him to management, and I should have, but I didn't. I was just hoping that I would not see him again. I never went by his apartment, and I never really had a reason to either. I was also more careful all the time, but I never noticed anything suspicious. Then, after not seeing him for about a month, I ran into another neighbor and decided to bring the situation up. She knew who I was talking about and hadn't got any notes from him herself, but she said that she had talked to him once and he seemed like a creep. She also said that he actually had just recently been evicted from the building for not paying his rent. That was a huge relief to me. After that, I never saw him or heard from him again. But it still creeps me out how he knew where I worked. Either he looked me up online and somehow found it out, or he must have followed me to work. Which one, I'm not sure, but I'm hoping that it was not the latter. Either way, I hope I never see that guy again. When I was younger, we had a situation with our neighbor that scared me a lot.
It was about 15 years ago, and I was 9 years old, sick with a fever that kept me tossing and turning all night. My parents let me sleep in their bed so they could keep an eye on me. I remember staring at the digital clock that projected the time onto the ceiling. I must have drifted off again, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake. The doorbell rang. It was 3 loud chimes, and then came 3 heavy thumps on the front door. It was dark, and when I glanced up, the clock read 5 a.m. I wasn't sure if I dreamed it or if it was real, but I instantly got nervous as I heard my parents sit up and whisper, "Was that the door?" Suddenly, a wave of fear washed over me. Who would be ringing the door at this time? My mind thought of stories that I had heard about burglars who knocked to lure homeowners into opening the door and then going inside. The knocking and ringing of the doorbell continued, with the knocking getting louder and louder. Our front door did not have a peephole, and the window was frosted glass, so you couldn't see anything out of it at night. My dad got up and headed down the stairs. The banging continued, and I was glad that my dad didn't open the door. Instead, he shouted out asking who was there. There was no answer, however, and the relentless ringing and pounding continued. My brothers and I, who were wide awake now, tried to look from upstairs windows, but we didn't have a good view of the front door. My dad finally dialed 911, and I listened as he spoke to the operator. The banging finally stopped, just as I heard the police cars pull up outside, and I hoped that they would be able to catch whoever had been trying to break into our house. As I looked through the window though, I felt confused, but also a little relieved. Instead of 1 police car, there were 4, plus 2 fire trucks. I remember wondering why the fire trucks needed to come. After what felt like a small eternity, my dad came back upstairs to explain the whole situation. The old lady next door had woken up convinced that she smelled smoke. She panicked, ran out of her house, and banged on our door for help. Because she was hard of hearing, she didn't hear my dad shouting. She had also called the police and fire department in her panic. The fire crew had checked her house and found no fire, just the lingering smell of her cigarette smoke. There was no intruder and no break-in, thankfully, but I remember being more scared than I ever had been in my life during those 10 minutes of banging on the door, thinking that an intruder was going to break in the door and kill me or something.
I live with my husband in a house that we've had for a few years now. Last year, something crazy occurred. We know some of the neighbors, but not everyone. Some I will just recognize, and others I've actually talked to and are friends with. People around here seem nice, and we've never had any problems with anyone. Generally, nothing crazy has happened here, and things will usually be pretty calm and quiet. For a little more background, I work a job where I get there early and generally am back home by 3 p.m. and sometimes 2. My husband will arrive home at a more normal time of around 5 or so, and we both work on weekdays. So one day, after I got back from work, my cell phone rang from a number that I didn't recognize, but it had a local area code. I answered it out of curiosity. It was a woman on the other end who I didn't recognize by her voice, but she sounded friendly. She said that she was my neighbor from down the street, and she had got my number from another neighbor. She then asked me if her son could stay at my house when he got home the following day. The reason was because she would be gone for work, and she just wanted me to have him stay here until she was back. Without really giving it much thought, I said sure, it would not be a problem. Now, I was wondering some things in my head, but I didn't ask them because I didn't want to seem rude. Like, for example, why did she ask me? I was fairly confident that I had never met this lady before, and I didn't even know exactly what house she lived in. Why would she trust me with her son when we had never met? But really, I assumed that she probably had spoken to the neighbors, and they had vouched for me. How did she know I would be home at that time also? Again, I thought probably the neighbors told her. I wasn't sure though, but I had talked about my job and other stuff to some neighbors. So I wasn't being suspicious or anything, and really I was just confused. I thought maybe the lady was new to the neighborhood and didn't really know anyone, and maybe the other neighbors weren't able to watch her kid first. I didn't mind watching her son, and I'm pretty good with kids and have watched friends' children in the past. So she told me that her son would come over at about 3 o'clock the following day, and when she got back from work, she could pick him up. I said okay, and we left it at that. I figured it would be easy, and he could just sit in the living room for a couple hours and watch TV or something. I told my husband about it when he got back, and he was just like, cool. So the next day, after I got back from work, there was no call or anything from the neighbor, but I luckily remembered. Shortly after 3 p.m., there was a knock at the front door. I went over and opened it, and was shocked at what I saw. There was no child there, but a tall, skinny-looking grown man standing outside my front door. He was young, looked to be early 20s, but he was definitely an adult nonetheless. When I opened the door, he smelled of cigarettes and alcohol. He had an overall dirty appearance. I was shocked. He then opened the door further and just walked right in with a backpack over his shoulder, saying a casual, "Hey, what's up?" After a moment, I said, "Who are you?" He said, "Didn't my mom tell you that I was coming over?" I said, "Yeah, but I thought you were like 7 or 8 years old." He said no, he was 25. What he said next shocked me even more. He said, "Yeah, I just need a place to stay until my mom comes back from her work trip in a few days." I was thinking, what? A few days? I asked him what he meant, and he told me that he would be staying here, and he asked where he would sleep. I told him I thought there was a misunderstanding, and not only did I think he was a young child, but I thought he would only be staying here for a few hours. His mom said nothing about it. I told him that we didn't have any space for him to stay the night. He started talking about how he didn't have anywhere to go, and how his girlfriend had kicked him out and stuff. I asked him why he can't stay at his mom's place without her being there, and he said that she had kicked him out too, and it was complicated. I didn't want to get into his family drama, and maybe he was going through a rough patch, but it wasn't fair for him to be dumped on me like this. I told him I was sorry, but he had to go. This is where his attitude seemed to change. He got slightly angry and said no, he was staying here, because I said he could. I told him once again to leave. That's when he said no once more, and he walked farther into the house. He went upstairs, almost running. I went after him, but when I got up there, he had run into our bedroom and shut the door and locked it behind him. I tried to get him to come out, but he was ignoring me. So then I called my husband and told him of the situation. He said he was on his way home. Then I tried reasoning with the guy, but he was completely ignoring me. I threatened to call the police, but that didn't seem to have an effect on him. I was seriously going to call the cops, but decided to wait until my husband got back. I then attempted to call the guy's mom, but when I did, the number appeared to have blocked me, because the calls would not go through. I went downstairs and just hoped that the guy wasn't going to steal or damage anything. My husband arrived home a short time later, and the guy was still up there. My husband went upstairs and started banging on the door and threatening to beat the guy up and stuff. After like 5 minutes of this, it finally got him to leave. He left the bedroom and ran down the stairs, practically being chased by my husband. He left and sprinted away down the street. We looked and nothing was stolen or messed up, thankfully. After that, I tried to figure out if they really lived on our street or not. I asked a few neighbors, but none of them said they gave my number to anyone else. So I really don't know who this woman was or how she got my number. I think maybe she did live down the street, or at least in the area, because I know there are a lot of houses on the block, and also she had to have known what time I get home every day, and I think that she might have been watching me. But it remains a bit of a mystery. I'm certainly going to ask more questions next time someone asks me to watch their kid.
I own a house, and I live by myself in it. I've not lived there for really that long, maybe 6 months. This is something that happened just a few weeks ago now. So for some background, I've always considered the neighborhood to be very average. It's not like a wealthy area, but it's also not known to be a bad neighborhood. Most of the people that I've met have been really nice. Of course, I didn't meet all my neighbors, but just a few. In the entire 6 months or so that I've lived in my house, everything has been fine, except for one night. A couple of weeks ago, like I mentioned, something really strange happened. I was in my living room sitting on my couch late one night. I think it was about 11 p.m. All of a sudden, my doorbell rang like 3 or 4 times in a row. It was really surprising. I didn't know why somebody would be at my house this late. I got up from the couch and walked over to the door. When I got there, I looked out of the window and nobody was there. I even opened up the door and went out onto the front step. I looked around but didn't see anybody. So then I went back inside of my house. But just a minute later, there was a knock on the front door. It was very loud, and I went over to the door again. But once more, whoever had knocked was gone. At this point, I figured that it was probably some neighborhood kids ding-dong ditching me. I thought they probably wouldn't come back. I waited around by the front door for a little while anyways, though. After a few minutes, nobody came back, so I finally returned to the living room. Maybe 10 minutes after this, there was a loud banging on the front door again. This time, I heard them knocking on a front window as well. I ran from the living room as fast as I could to get over to the front door. When I arrived, the people had stopped, but I was just able to see them running away. I saw what appeared to be 3 grown men running from the end of my driveway and into the street. I had figured it to be teenagers, but these guys looked a little older. Still, it was probably just a harmless prank. But the fact that one of them was banging on the front window next to the door this time was a little bit weird. After 10 minutes went by with nothing, I returned to the other room again. Some more time went by, and I actually thought that they were gone for good now. By this time, it was getting really late. But then they came back yet again, and this time was the worst by far. I first heard a really loud knock at the front door. I started running over there again, and as I was doing so, I suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking. When I arrived near the front door, I saw that the window in my front door had been broken. There was glass on the ground, and this made me so angry that I ran over to the door and went outside. I saw the same 3 men running away into the street. I ran through my front yard and into the street after them. They were pretty far ahead of me, but I saw them go into a house that was almost at the end of the street. After they all went inside, I kept going down the street until I got to the house. My plan was to confront them. This was not a silly joke anymore, but now a crime. Their house was probably the worst looking one on the entire street. I walked up to the front door and knocked on it, but nobody responded. I continued to knock on their door, and I wasn't going to go away. After I was knocking for a few minutes, I heard somebody yell from inside for me to leave. I yelled back that they broke my window. There was a few minutes of nothing. But then, I heard somebody coming from behind the house. There was a person out in the yard. I couldn't see much because they had no porch light there or anything. Moments after hearing whoever it was get to the side of the house, I looked over, and then I heard something whiz past my head and hit a bush. Somebody threw a rock at me. Then another one nearly hit me, and instead hit the side of the house. I turned around and started running away. When I was sprinting off the property, I heard at least 2 people laughing, which made me really mad. Still, I couldn't stay there. I got back to my house and was not chased or anything. Once I was there, I called the police. They came out a short time later, and after showing them my window and telling them what had happened, they went over to the neighbors. Apparently, about 5 adults lived in that house, and most of them were drug addicts. They had multiple illegal drugs inside of the house, so when the cops showed up at the front door, they panicked and one guy tried running away. The police ended up going inside and finding the drugs, and multiple people were arrested. I also pressed charges against them for both throwing rocks at me and breaking my window. Shortly after that, the house was sold to new owners who turned the place around.
This is something that happened back when I was younger. I lived in a pretty calm neighborhood. It was packed with houses, kids playing in the street, and people grilling outside. During the time of this story, it was summer, so the neighborhood was lively. I knew my neighbors, but they didn't know me. The only reason I knew them was because I'd overhear conversations through their open kitchen window, but they knew nothing about me. Our backyard was fenced in, and so was theirs. The fences met at one point, so there were small cracks in the wood, not big enough to see clearly through, but enough to catch a glimpse if you got close. I spent a lot of time outside practicing baseball in our batting cage or playing with my dog, so I was usually out there. I never really thought about whether the neighbors spent much time in their yard until something strange happened. One day, as I was walking past the fence, I heard something, a whisper. I stopped, confused. I stood there listening, but it was quiet. I couldn't tell if I'd imagined it or if it was just the wind. After a moment, I shrugged it off and kept going. The next day, I was outside again, this time playing with my dog. I wasn't making much noise, but then I heard it again. This time, it sounded like someone saying, "Hey." I paused, trying to figure out where it came from. It sounded close, like it was coming from the fence, but I couldn't see anyone. I started to wonder if I was imagining things. I told myself that if it happened again, I'd get to the bottom of it. I noticed it only happened when I was outside during the day, so I decided to switch my routine. I started practicing at night when it was quiet and pitch black. The high fences made me feel safe, and I liked the peacefulness. One night, after finishing my practice, I paused to gather my things. Everything was calm, and I was just enjoying the quiet when I heard it again. This time, it said my name, Cassidy. I stopped what I was doing and looked at the fence. It felt like it came from right behind it. I leaned closer to the cracks in the wood and thought I saw something, a shadow or a figure. I couldn't make it out clearly, but it felt like it was watching me. I couldn't imagine how anyone could know my name. I'd never told my name to anyone in the neighborhood, and my parents didn't talk to the neighbors either. I tried to stay calm and act like I didn't hear anything, but the voice came again. "Cassidy, don't ignore me." I decided to respond. I walked closer to the fence and said, "Hello?" But nobody answered. I put my hand on the fence, and suddenly there was a loud bang. Something had slammed into the wood with enough force to crack it. Almost immediately, I heard vicious growling and barking. It sounded like a dog was tearing at the wood from the other side, biting it like it was styrofoam. The noise was frenzied, like whatever it was on the other side wanted to break through. I panicked and ran inside to tell my parents. When I explained, they looked confused. "The neighbors don't have a dog," they said. I insisted I wasn't imagining it, and they followed me outside to check. Sure enough, the fence was cracked. The wood had been pushed outward, like something had slammed into it. We went over to talk to the neighbors. They seemed surprised when we told them what happened. They repeated what my parents said. "We don't have a dog. The only person in the backyard was our daughter, and she's 7. That didn't make sense. How could a 7-year-old break through a fence with enough force to crack the wood? The neighbors didn't seem to believe what we were saying, but their backyard had security cameras, so we asked them to check. We watched the footage. We didn't see anyone or anything near the fence. Their daughter wasn't even outside at the time, but the audio was clear. You could hear the whispering, the growling, the barking, and the loud bang when the fence cracked. Everyone stood there, unsure of what to make of it. One of the parents suggested it might have been an elaborate prank pulled off by the kids using a sound machine or something, but even that explanation sounded silly. How would kids have done something like this without being seen? And why? To this day, I think it was their daughter. Something about her didn't sit right with me. I'm not a big believer in supernatural stuff, but that night felt unexplainable. Anyone I've told this story to doesn't believe me, but I know what I heard, and I know what we saw, or didn't see. My family moved out after a year. During that time, I avoided the neighbors completely. Occasionally, I'd catch their daughter watching me through the fence, just standing there, staring. I never acknowledged her. When I moved to my new apartment, everything in my life felt like it was finally working out. I had just been promoted at work after years of grinding. My salary doubled, I bought my first new car, and I was finally leaving my cramped studio for a real apartment. It was a corner unit on the 8th floor with a wide window that looked over the river and the downtown lights. The building looked older from outside, but the apartment itself was great. 2 bedrooms, a decent kitchen, a living room big enough for the couch I had been saving for, and the rent was also lower than anything else I had seen in that area. I signed the lease that same day. The move-in was exhausting, and that night I sat on the couch eating takeout and watching random shows until I passed out. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to noises above me. It sounded like someone stomping on the floor above me. I checked the time, and it was 2:15 a.m. I didn't want to start trouble with my neighbors on the first night, so I ignored it. I put in earbuds and went back to sleep. The next night, the same thing happened, but I figured maybe the people upstairs had just moved in too. But the next night, the same thing happened again. Sometimes I heard what sounded like objects hitting the floor. One night, it sounded like dishes were breaking. Another time, I thought I heard a woman shouting, but the words were muffled and short. It went on every night. By the 6th day in my new apartment, I was barely sleeping. I started coming home from work already stressed, just waiting for it to start again. On Friday night, I got back at around 10:30 p.m. I showered and laid in bed scrolling on my phone. Eventually, the noises started again. That was the moment I decided I was done ignoring it. I put on my shoes and went upstairs. I knocked lightly and then harder a couple times, and stood there for a good 5 minutes waiting for someone to open the door, but nobody came. Confused, I went back down to my apartment, figuring they didn't want to confront me. The next morning was Saturday, and after another long night of noise, I decided I would deal with it once and for all. I grabbed my phone and called the building's front desk. I got no answer though, so I waited a few minutes, threw on my shoes, locked my door, and headed to the stairwell to head down to the main lobby. The stairwell lights were off for some reason, so it was darker than usual. As I started down the stairs, I heard footsteps behind me. They were slow at first, but then they matched my pace. By the time I reached the 6th floor, they sounded closer and were speeding up. I didn't know why, but my chest got tighter and I felt the urge to run down the stairs the rest of the way. As I sped up and ran down the stairs as fast as I could, I heard footsteps behind me accelerating into a run. I ran the rest of the way down and pushed the doors to the lobby. The guard was sitting at the desk, and I told him all about the problems I'd been having with my neighbors upstairs. He looked confused and said that he had only started working there 2 days ago. He didn't know anything about the building yet or the residents, but he mentioned the previous guard had worked there over 10 years and lived a few streets away. He gave me the address. I drove there immediately, and the old guard was very friendly and let me into his place. I explained everything I had been dealing with yet again to the older guard. Eventually, he sighed and told me there used to be a couple living in that unit above me. They argued all the time, and everyone in the building could hear it. He went on to say that one night the husband snapped, and the neighbors heard fighting, things breaking, and someone screaming. The man had killed his wife in that apartment directly above me, and the police took him away that same night. After that, every tenant who moved into the unit below complained about the same noises that I had described. So that had forced me to move out of my dream apartment after only a week, which apparently was the longest anyone had lasted in my unit. This happened about 10 years ago when I was 15 years old on summer break. I grew up in a very run-of-the-mill middle-class neighborhood in San Antonio. Our house sat on a corner, and the fence around the backyard had horizontal wood beams that made almost an X, as opposed to the more common vertical fence post. Because of this, there were larger gaps in between the beams, and seeing through was fairly easy. Another detail worth noting, our back gate on the side of the house near the road had been wide open many mornings. Because of this, my dad had looped some wire through the latch and twisted it like a bread tie to keep it engaged and closed, but we would still find it open. In the backyard, there was a large deck and an above-ground pool that the deck was built up to on one end. A huge, beautiful oak tree shaded the deck and the part of the pool that was closest to the house, so my sister and I would anchor our feet to the farthest edge and sunbathe on our floats near the fence. This happened on a Sunday. My grandfather was visiting, and he and my parents were inside napping. My older sister was gone with her friends to a different pool, and I decided to go float in the backyard on my own. My mom closed the blinds to the back and habitually locked the back door before laying down on the couch to snooze. I was in the pool for maybe 20 minutes, and I could see that someone was standing on the other side of the fence looking in. The sun was shining in my face, and I couldn't see him well, and I found it weird but didn't say anything. I saw him walk off, and I didn't think much about it. Minutes passed, and I decided to swim around a bit to cool off and then go back on the float. This time I was positioned so that I was looking up at the house instead of towards the fence. It felt like only a minute passed before I heard wood creaking behind me. I turned around, and this man was halfway over our back fence, maybe 15 feet away from me once he would get to the ground. Part of me was in shock, and I froze for a moment before sheer terror and panic took over. I realized that this was not a dream and this was really happening, and I needed to get inside now. I felt as though the pool became Olympic-sized, and I could not get to the edge and climb out fast enough. By the time I made it out of the pool and started running to the back door, the man had made his way around the pool and was also up on the deck coming towards me. He was maybe in his late 20s or 30s, thin and around 6 feet tall. He just walked the entire time and never spoke. I got to the door and it was locked, so I started screaming, let me in," as I pounded on the door. My mom was right there to unlock it very quickly, and when she opened the door, the man was just standing right behind me with this blank look in his eyes. I was crying, my grandpa was freaking out, and the man was just standing there looking inside of our house. My dad came downstairs and went crazy, screaming at the man and pushed him while telling him to leave our property. My mom was on the phone with the police at this point, and the next moment makes the whole thing 10 times creepier. The man got up off the ground where my dad had pushed him and walked over around the house to the back gate, which had the wire in the latch. He untwisted it and pushed through, leaving the gate wide open, and walked back across the street and into our neighbor's house. The police arrived, and it turned out that the man had been staying with his sister for the past 8 weeks and was on parole. However, he had recently been released from jail for theft and assault charges. He had also broken into a different neighbor's home and stolen some fine china and a few of their family photos. He went back to jail, and we never found our back gate left open again. I still get chills thinking about it because my sister and I both had our bedrooms downstairs with our windows facing the backyard, and I just know he was coming in our yard and watching us at night. My parents moved out of that home a few years later, and I went to college. I slept upstairs on a pull-out couch for months after the incident and will never live on a ground floor again if I can help it. About 12 years ago, my boyfriend at the time and I stumbled across what seemed like an unbelievable deal. A quiet little studio on top of a hill that we could rent for almost nothing. The catch was that we had to help maintain the 3 properties on the land and occasionally help our landlord with meals or drive him into town. Usually, if we took him out to eat, he treated us, so it honestly worked out pretty well. The studio itself needed a fair amount of work to be done before it was comfortable. We spent our first weeks doing renovations and fixing things up. Our studio sat at the top of a long driveway. Across the driveway, about 150 feet away, lived our only neighbor. Our landlord lived farther off to the right, about 3/4 of a football field away, and his girlfriend stayed in an apartment above his garage. The landlord was incredibly easygoing. We got free cable, water, and electricity. The only bill we had to worry about was propane for heat and hot water, which we had shared with the neighbors because both houses used the same large propane tank. We didn't officially meet the neighbor until a few weeks after we moved in. We introduced ourselves and chatted politely. A couple of weeks later, I ran into her again outside, and we talked for nearly an hour. Eventually, the conversation turned to the renovations we had been doing, and I invited her inside to show her the progress. Since it was a studio, stepping through the front door basically showed you the whole house. But the moment she walked in, she pointed at our bed and asked, "Is that a used mattress?" The question caught me completely off guard. I'm extremely particular about keeping my bed clean. I use waterproof mattress covers and keep everything spotless. The bright white edges of the mattress was visible from when I had made the bed earlier that morning. All I could say was, "No, I bought it brand new." After that awkward moment, we didn't see much of each other for a few weeks. Then one day, the landlord's girlfriend pulled me aside and told me something shocking. Apparently, our neighbor had been telling both her and the landlord that my boyfriend and I were known for burglarizing houses. I was stunned. Neither of us had criminal records, and neither of us had ever known anyone who committed burglaries. Supposedly, the neighbor claimed she knew because her daughter had recently become a police officer and worked at the jail. We all eventually dismissed the accusation, but the whole situation felt bizarre. Not long after that, I started noticing the dirty looks. Things got even stranger when I had to go collect her half of the propane bill. She handed me a check, and when I read her name aloud, something suddenly clicked in my memory. Years earlier, when I was about 16, I had gone to her house for Thanksgiving with my high school boyfriend. Her parents were friends with her and her husband, and their daughter was around our age. We all hung out while the adults drank and cooked dinner. I barely remembered interacting with adults, except during the dinner. But afterwards, my boyfriend told me that I wasn't welcome back to that house. We couldn't understand why. A couple of months later, I found out. I had hit puberty early and wasn't exactly flat-chested. My boyfriend's father apparently spent the evening staring at my chest, and the neighbor's husband had as well. Once the wives heard about it, they were furious. Somehow, I ended up being the one banned from their house. Now, more than a decade later, she clearly remembered who I was, and recently she had gone through a bitter divorce from that same husband. After that realization, the tension between us only grew. Every time I locked my car with the key fob and the horn chirped, she would immediately make her car horn honk too from inside her house. Then our landlord told us that she had asked that we stay completely off her property and never knock on her door again. Ironically, a few days later, she asked the landlord to request that we go inside her house while she was gone, to assemble a treadmill that she had bought, leaving her door unlocked for us. Things escalated further when a friend came to visit us one day. When he walked up our driveway, he looked confused. He told us the neighbor had taken a photo of his license plate and asked whether he planned to stay the night. Soon she started photographing our vehicles as well. She became extremely petty in monitoring whether we drove too fast up the driveway, yelling if she thought we crossed onto her side, and even threatening to sue us because one of our cats supposedly scratched her car. Around that time, one of my cats, an especially curious one, wandered into her house when she had left her door open. Not too long after, the cat disappeared. My boyfriend and I searched everywhere. A couple months later, we smelled something dead somewhere on the property, but we never found the source. The atmosphere on the property became tense for everyone, including the landlord and his girlfriend. One afternoon, I caught her sneaking around the side of our house while my boyfriend and I were talking outside. She was clearly eavesdropping. After that, I started hearing strange noises outside our windows at night. Then there was the mail. All 3 houses shared a single locked mailbox, and only the landlord had the key. Since he and his girlfriend didn't drive, the neighbor usually picked up the mail and dropped it off at his house for everyone. One day, I was expecting a state check in the mail, but it never showed up. Later, I also noticed I wasn't receiving other important items such as my driver's license, vehicle registration tags, and even social security paperwork. That's when I came up with a plan. I created an envelope that looked like an important piece of mail addressed to me and gave it directly to our mailman to place in the mailbox. Then I waited. Sure enough, when the neighbor brought the mail to the landlord's house, my envelope was missing. I reported the theft to the postmaster and even contacted the sheriff. But because mail theft is a federal issue and it was during the early recession, the case was never pursued. Then things got even worse when the neighbor recommended a young couple rent the apartment above the landlord's garage. Despite all her paranoia about our visitors, the couple she brought in turned out to be criminals. One night while we were out at dinner, they broke into the landlord's house and stole a phone from the living room. The phone was one I had lended to my landlord. It was my recently deceased mother's phone. I confronted them after confirming the phone was inside their apartment by texting it and hearing the distinctive notification tone. They denied everything. Later, the same couple stole the landlord's car. It was found 4 days later abandoned in a nearby canyon, costing him nearly $3,000 in impound fees. Eventually, I moved out once renovations on the house I had inherited from my mom were finished. The final straw came when the neighbor let her large German Shepherd loose just as my 4-year-old son stepped out of my car. The dog ran towards him, barking and growling. The landlord later told me that the neighbor calmed down after I left, even though my boyfriend still lived there. After I moved away for good, life finally went back to normal. Looking back, the only explanation we could come up with was that she had held on to some strange resentment from that awkward Thanksgiving years earlier and blamed her divorce on me. Either way, living next door to her was definitely an experience I'll never forget. I live alone in a house that I'm currently renting. I don't know any of the neighbors at all. It's a populated neighborhood where the yards are small and there are many houses in rows. Not too long after I moved in, one time I ordered something online to be delivered. However, I never received it, even after it said it had been delivered. Nothing was there and I had no photos of the delivery from the company, so I assumed that it must have been sent to my old address or something by accident. If that was the case, I would not have been able to get it as that was too far away. So I decided to just order it again. A few days later, when it was delivered, I didn't know it had been delivered yet, but it was there. I was upstairs on the 2nd floor of my place when I noticed something through a front window. I saw a woman exit the house directly across the street from mine. She then walked through her front yard and basically made a beeline to my front yard. She then proceeded to walk right through the yard and up to my front step. I was just standing there watching her, and I don't think she knew I was there because she never once looked at me. I thought that she was going to knock on the door, but for what reason I did not know. She went out of my sight when she got up to the front step because I couldn't see that from my angle. But instead of knocking on the door, I saw her then come back into my view seconds later, walking away and holding a package. I realized that was my delivery and she was walking away really fast. My neighbor had just stole my package. I took off running out of the room and down the stairs. When I got to the front door though, the woman was already across the street and entering her house. By the time I opened the door, she had just got inside. I marched right over there and then banged on her front door. Moments later, she answered it, looking all confused. She was opening the door just a crack, like she was all defensive, and just stuck her head around the corner. It was like she was ready to slam the door shut at a moment's notice. I told her that I just saw her take my package and steal it. The woman then claimed that it was her package and it had been delivered to my house by mistake. Not knowing 100% if my package had in fact been delivered yet, I stopped and thought for a moment. She got me to actually doubt myself there for a second, but then I told her that I had just ordered a package and it was supposed to be delivered that day and should be there by now. The woman told me once more that no, it was hers and that she knew nothing about my packages. Then she said that she had to go and slammed the door shut and locked it really loud. I then went on my phone and checked my email. Sure enough, it said that my package had just been delivered about 30 minutes earlier, and there was no package there now. I knew she had stole it, so I then banged on the door and told her that I knew she stole my package. She didn't answer though. I tried to reason with her. I yelled from the front step that if she could show me the package with her name on it, I would leave her alone, but she still didn't answer. I stood there knocking on the door on and off for like 10 minutes, but she refused to come to the door again. I was so mad. I didn't want to do anything crazy, so I cooled down and then calmly walked back to my place. That explained why I didn't get my delivery the first time, because she had stolen that one too. I realized that I needed to figure out how to stop this woman. I thought about calling the cops, but then decided to give her one last opportunity to come clean, because after all, calling the cops on a neighbor can start a whole mess. And she probably wouldn't get in that much trouble for stealing one $30 package from me twice. So I went back to her house the following day. As to be expected, she did not answer, so I left a note. It said, "I know you stole my packages. You have 48 hours to come clean before I get the cops involved. Sincerely, your neighbor." Well, later that day, I got a knock at my door. I thought that it would be the woman, but when I opened it, it wasn't her. It was some man. I'd never seen him before, but he said that he was the husband of the woman across the street. He said that she was terribly upset because I had accused her of stealing, and he knew that she was innocent. He tried to lecture me about making a false police report and accusing others of stealing. I tried to tell him my evidence, which was clear as day, but he would have none of it. He stormed off, claiming that if I got the cops involved, he would, quote, "make my life miserable," whatever that means. Now, I should have just gone to the cops right then and there, but that encounter made me want to try to catch the woman in the act. So I went out and bought a security camera and positioned it on my front step. Then I ordered a package and purposely left it out for several days. However, I got no luck. I realized that she probably saw the camera, possibly even saw me installing it, because the camera only showed the front step and then part of the front yard and driveway. It didn't reach the street or the neighbor's property, so she very well could have been on her way over to steal again and then noticed it. I tried to hide it, but there were really no great hiding places to make it impossible to see. But at least this would stop her from stealing in the future. For a few weeks, things were fine. I never saw her or her husband or anything. I decided to just let the matter go, as angry as I still was about it. Then, one night, I arrived home pretty late. When I did, for whatever reason, I glanced over across the street. There was one light on in a front window. I saw the woman just staring at me from inside with this angry look on her face. She was just glaring right at me. When we made eye contact, she didn't look away or anything. I turned away and then walked inside. But when I got to a front window in the house and looked out, I saw that she was still staring at my house. She was just glaring at it with an angry face. It was really creepy. She remained like that for about 10 minutes. Then she finally moved away and covered her window. I guess that she was pouting because she couldn't steal any more of my packages. That was the last time I saw her. I haven't seen her or her husband since then, and that was almost a year ago now. I'm not aware of them moving out, as the same car is still in their driveway, but I haven't seen them in any capacity. That's probably a good thing, and I probably won't live here too much longer as I'm looking at places across town. I hope that I never see that woman again. When I was 19, I rented a small basement unit with my sister and her baby. It was one of those split houses where the landlord lived upstairs and rented out the lower level. The place wasn't great, but it was cheap and close to where I worked. The landlord was a quiet guy in his late 50s. He didn't talk much, but he always seemed to be around. A couple months after we moved in, he told us he needed to bring someone over to check the water heater. While the repair guy was there, I noticed he paid more attention to us than the heater. If I walked from the kitchen to the living room, his eyes would follow. At one point, I caught him standing in the hallway near the bedrooms, even though the heater was in a separate closet. When I asked if he needed help, he just said he was checking pressure and went back. After about an hour, he left, and I didn't really know anything about water heaters, so I couldn't judge his process too much. 2 days later, my sister took her baby to stay overnight at a friend's place, leaving me alone. Around 9 p.m., I heard a knock on the door. It was the same guy who had come to fix the heater 2 days prior. He said he needed to recheck something and that it would only take a minute. I told him it wasn't a good time and he should come back when the landlord was home. He insisted, saying it was urgent and it could cause a leak if not handled right away. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. I kept the door mostly closed and told him to come back the next day. That's when he put his hand in the door and tried to push it open, not hard yet, but softly I guess, trying to coerce his way into my place. He smiled, but it didn't match what he was doing. I told him to leave, but instead of answering, he looked past me into the apartment and took another step forward. I pushed the door shut harder and told him to leave. Right before I closed it completely, I saw movement near the side of the entrance where the wall jutted out just enough to block part of the view. My landlord was standing there, pressed flat against the wall, just out of sight from the doorway. I slammed the door, locked it, and didn't move for a while. I could hear low voices outside for a few seconds, then footsteps going up the stairs. I didn't sleep well that night and even barricaded the door with some furniture. The next morning, I told my sister everything. We packed our stuff that same day and left. We didn't tell the landlord we were going until after we were gone. The landlord and the repair guy, who I'm assuming was his buddy, definitely could have forced their way into my apartment, because I almost believed the repair guy at first. However, I'm glad that I ended up being safe that night. I contacted the police about it, but I have no idea if anything ever happened with my report.
I used to live by myself in an apartment in the city. From just about the very day I moved in, strange things started happening. I think it was like my third or fourth night there. I got a knock on my door at almost 2 o'clock in the morning. I opened it up and saw nobody there. I looked all around the hall, but there wasn't anybody in sight. Then, the next day, I saw on the floor outside my door was just a cover page of a magazine. The guy in the front of the magazine had his eyes poked out, and there was a large X over his face. I was confused and figured maybe there was a kid pranking me or something like that. Over the next few weeks, things like this continued to happen. Sometimes I would hear knocks coming from the other side of my wall in the living room. Other times I would get knocks on my front door, or other weird types of mail showing up on my front step, things that I didn't ask for. During the day, I would occasionally see people coming or going from their apartments. The guy that lived next door to me was a younger looking adult and seemed like just an average guy. One day as I was leaving though, I thought I saw him approaching my door, and when I stepped outside, he quickly walked back inside of his room and slammed the door when he saw me. I noticed that he appeared to be holding a magazine or something like that in his hand, and based on the evidence, I thought he might be behind the things that were happening. I wanted to get to the bottom of it, so I decided to go to his apartment and confront him. I wouldn't do it if I wasn't sure that he was behind it, but at the time I was about 90% sure. I was nervous, but I was tired of the weird things happening and wanted them to stop, so the next day I went over there. I knocked on his door, and he answered it looking sort of confused. The guy had sort of curly hair and glasses, and he asked what I wanted. I told the man that I was his next door neighbor and pointed to my room. The guy said, "Yeah, I know." I told him how strange things were happening to me, and some of the noises that I was hearing sounded like they were coming from his room. I then mentioned how I had seen him look like he was about to put something in my front step. The man completely denied everything. I asked him if someone else lived with him who was maybe responsible. The man told me that he lived in his apartment by himself and had lived there for several years and didn't appreciate me accusing him of this stuff. He then suggested maybe I was just going crazy and then slammed the door in my face. I was pretty disappointed on how it went talking to him, and I went back to my apartment feeling pretty embarrassed. I realized, though, that it wasn't a very good plan that I had to confront the guy. After that, the strange things kept continuing. I got a few more random pieces of paper at my front step, some with red X's on them, others with curse words probably directed at me. Then one night, I got a knock on my door very late at night, and of course nobody was there. Then, a few minutes later, I heard a distinct knocking coming from the other side of my wall that was 100% coming from the man's apartment. I was so angry that I stormed over and started pounding on his door. I kept knocking on the door and yelled for him to open up, but the man wouldn't answer. A few minutes later, the door across the hall opened, and I saw a woman who was wearing pajamas come out. She looked like she had just woken up, and she asked me what I was doing. I explained the situation to her, and she told me that the guy who lives there's name was Mike, and he had left the day before and was out of town for a week. When I heard this, I didn't know what to do. I felt bad for waking the woman up. I told her sorry, then went back to my apartment and went to bed. I decided after that to just move out. I stayed there for a few more weeks. The strange things happened up until about a week before I moved, and it stopped. I'm glad I don't live there anymore because it was very weird. This happened when I was a kid. During that time, I lived with my family in a 2-story home
on a typical residential street. For some reason, I had always thought that our next-door neighbor was creepy. I didn't have a good reason why, because I was just a kid and I never really interacted with him or anything. I didn't see him that often, but I didn't really want to. The guy was short, sort of thin, and didn't come outside very much. He also didn't seem that friendly, but I really didn't know a whole lot about him. All I knew was that he just gave me a bad feeling. Well, one night, my brother was at his friend's house and my parents went grocery shopping. I was about 12 and was home alone doing homework. I know that I had a lot of homework that night, or else I would have gone with my parents to go to the store. It was dark out and I was in my bedroom on the second floor. Probably about 30 minutes after my parents left, there was a knock on the front door. Immediately, something about this seemed off. It was like 8 p.m. and dark out. Who would be knocking at this time? I knew that we weren't expecting anyone. I sat there in my room thinking of the possibilities. Then they knocked again. I left my bedroom and walked over to my brother's bedroom where there was a view of the front door. When I went to his window and looked out, I saw the next door neighbor. The guy was standing right there on the front step. What could he want? I didn't know. What I did know was that I was not going to open up the door for him. I stayed where I was and watched him. He was just standing there looking around. I saw him press his face up against the window, then he stepped back and casually started walking away. He cut through the grass back towards his yard. I thought that he would be gone then, and I started to feel better. I returned to my bedroom, only to be interrupted about a minute later. What I heard was the sound of somebody at the back door. Now I could kind of see this area from my bedroom window. I looked out and saw the man trying to open the back door. Thankfully, it was locked. He then stayed at the door for a while before finally walking away. I was really scared now. This guy had actually tried entering our house. I had been right to think that he was creepy. After a few minutes went by, I went downstairs to make sure that he was gone. When I got down there, as soon as I entered the dining room, I saw him looking in the window. He looked right at me and then moved out of sight. That was a really scary moment. I turned and ran all the way back upstairs. I had no cell phone back then, so I had to go back downstairs to make a call. For several minutes, I was too scared to. Finally, I left my bedroom and went back downstairs. Then I called my parents, who luckily were on their way home. When they got home, I told them all about it. My dad went over to talk to the neighbor, but he didn't answer the door. We considered calling the police, but didn't. Honestly, we should have. The next day, my dad went back to the guy's house again. This time he answered and denied everything. After that, I was terrified of him and didn't want to be home by myself. My family and I ended up moving from that house across town less than a year later after this. We didn't move because of the man. It was because of my dad's work, but I'm glad that we moved away from him. I'm not sure why he tried to go into our house, but I'm really glad that he didn't.
I had lived in our quiet neighborhood for years, so when a new family moved in next door, it was a little bit exciting. They seemed normal. It was a mother and father with 2 kids and a golden retriever. I welcomed them with a plate of cookies, and they seemed friendly. We exchanged small talk about the weather and neighborhood events every now and then. I eventually began having concerns about something going on in their backyard, though. There was this awful smell which kept getting stronger and stronger. At first, I thought it was just a backyard barbecue. The family often had friends over, and the scent of grilled meat would be through the air, but it kept growing stronger. It reminded me of something decaying, but I tried to ignore it. As the weeks went by, the smell coming from their yard got worse, and I found myself watching them more closely. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I was sitting on my porch, the smell stronger than ever, and I decided to take a walk. I approached their backyard, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was going on. The fence was high, but I could see through the slats. I was startled by what I saw. The kids were playing, but the parents stood together in a corner, pulling a tarp over something that looked like a compost bin in the corner of their yard. I thought maybe that might explain the smell, but I wondered why they would want to cover it with a tarp. About a week later, I saw their car pulling out of the garage. I thought nobody was home, so I went over to check the compost bin because the smell was still awful,
and I wanted to know what food remnants would smell that bad. I slipped into their backyard as the smell hit me harder now, almost overwhelming. I approached the covered object, held my breath, and pulled back the tarp. It was a large rusted container, and inside I saw the remnants of what looked like many animals, just a bunch of bones and scraps of fur of all sizes. I couldn't even fathom how many dead animals were in there, making the pile so large. As I left their backyard, I looked back and saw the mother of the family watching me with a serious blank face from one of the back windows. I thought that everyone had left in their car, but apparently the mother had been home the whole time watching me. I felt guilty about snooping around their yard, but what I had seen was so weird. I mean, they had either been killing all these different types of animals or finding them dead as roadkill or something and bringing them back. Why in the world would they store dead animal carcasses in their backyard is beyond any reason I could think of. They could have been eating these animals, but it wasn't a major hunting season, and we didn't live in an area where the main type of sustenance was hunting animals. We lived in the suburbs, but we're in a big city. It definitely felt out of place. I thought about telling someone other than my family about it, but I'm not sure if something like that was even illegal or wrong. Anyways, the next time I was by their fence a couple of days later, I peeked through, and the whole container with the tarp covering it was now gone and nowhere to be seen. I never viewed those neighbors as normal again. This started when I was in kindergarten or first grade. The neighbors who terrorized us lived one house over, and it's important to know that their teenage son, who I will call Jack, was known as a screw-up. He was caught on camera watching our next-door neighbor showering. My parents were friends with our neighbors, so she told my mom. Then my dad's expensive racing bikes got stolen out of our detached garage. My dad saw Jason riding the stolen bike around the neighborhood, so he thought he should just confront his parents and demand the bike back. The father asked Jason right in front of my dad if he took the bike, and Jason said no. Then Jason's father threatened my dad with violence. We called the police, but they were no help. Not too long after that, Jason's dad showed up outside of our house, yelling that he and his friend were going to beat up my dad for yelling at Jason. Not too long after, something horrible happened. We left our pet bunny and guinea pig outside on nice days, and only if someone was home. That day was one of those days. My brother and I got back from going out with our mom and ran to check on them. I can still see what I saw in my head. Our bunny was drowned in our kiddie pool, and the guinea pig had been kicked across the yard into the alley. My mom, brother, and I were all crying hysterically. They were innocent, and only a psychopath would murder helpless animals. Her injuries were so severe that we had to put her to sleep. Jason's dad did this because my dad had yelled at Jason about stealing his bike earlier that week. My mom had enough and confronted the dad, who just laughed. He said they were just animals. My parents called the police, who informed them that they were at the house constantly anyways, and I can't remember if Jason's dad got in trouble. Time passed for a while without any problems from the neighbors, until one night when I was in second grade. I was asleep with my dog named Wrinkles in bed with me, where my bed faces the windows. Suddenly, Wrinkles was going nuts, and I heard a sound coming from near the screen on my open window. Then a loud male whisper which sounded like Jason. He said in more obscene terms that he was going to have relations with me. I jumped out of bed and ran to my parents' room, shaking and crying so hard I couldn't breathe. I told them someone was outside my window. They called the police, who found one of our lounge chairs outside my window, and the screen ripped like someone was trying to get into my room. They also found a shoe print. It was so traumatic and disgusting that a 16-year-old would say that to a second grader. They went to Jason's house, but apparently he wasn't home, and they searched for him but never found him. My parents put up lights all the way around the house after that. A short time later, my mom found a paper plate with rice and a dead crow outside of our back door. Our evil neighbors moved not long after the husband died. His wife had joked about poisoning him before, so we always wonder if that's what ended up happening. The whole thing was extremely messed up, and it all started over a stolen bike. Jason is apparently a cop now, but I really hope that's false. My name is Denise, and I used to live in an older apartment close to the city. I lived in it for 1 year total. Over my time living there, I got to know a couple of my neighbors, but not many. I would see some people around the building or in the hallways, but most of them I never had any conversations with or anything. After I'd been living there for almost a year, something odd happened. It was really late at night on a Friday. I was staying up late watching a movie, and I was by myself. All of my lights were off, and I was eating popcorn when suddenly I heard that somebody was trying to enter my apartment. The front doorknob was rattling, and it startled me. I paused the movie and listened close. The doorknob turned several times. I kind of expected somebody to knock, but they didn't. Whoever was there tried opening the door again. I got up as quietly as I could and tiptoed over to my front door. It wasn't that far away, and when I looked out the peephole, I saw a guy standing right outside. He appeared to be looking closely to my doorknob or lock area, so I couldn't see his face at first. As I leaned my face against the door moved a little bit. When it did, the guy at my door backed up and I saw his face. It was one of my neighbors. I didn't know his name, and we had said hi to each other a couple of times in the hallways, maybe once or twice. I knew that he lived on my floor and across the hall, about 4 doors down. After he backed up, I saw him walk away back towards his place. I was kind of creeped out. Why was he trying to get into my apartment? I stayed up for a while and looked outside of my door a few more times. I never saw him again, though. I was finally able to go to sleep at like 3 a.m. The next morning, I woke up at about 9. When I left my bedroom, I thought I heard something at my front door again. I don't know if I was just paranoid now, but I walked over and looked out of it once again. The same guy was there, my neighbor. He then tried opening the door again. When it didn't open, I saw him just turn around and walk away. I did my best to make sense of this, but I had no idea what he was doing. A couple of days went by. I was leaving to go to work and happened to see my neighbor walking in my direction like we were going to cross paths down the hallway. I wanted to turn around and go back to my place, but I decided not to. When we made it within about 10 feet of each other, we made eye contact. That's when he said hi to me and told me how he had gone to my door the other night. He said that he didn't know if he woke me up or not, but he had accidentally tried to enter my apartment, and he apologized. He told me that he had gotten back home from the bars with friends and was a little drunk. I told him it was all right, and I understood, and then we went our separate ways. But I didn't understand. At first, it all made perfect sense to me, and I felt relieved. But after I thought more about it, I realized that he didn't really seem drunk when he was messing around with my door. And the way that he was messing with it was like he was trying to break in, not like he thought that he lived there. And even if he was just drunk, why did he come back and try to get in again the next morning? I don't think that he would still be drunk and wander back to my apartment at 9 a.m. I tried to just tell myself that I was making more of it, and he was telling me the truth. A few more days went by. It was late at night again, and this time I was in my bedroom on my phone. The time was probably about 11 o'clock, and there was a knocking at my door. It was kind of quiet, but I heard it. I got up, walked over to the door, and looked outside. The same guy was back. As I was looking out the peephole, he knocked again. When he knocked, I accidentally bumped the door forward again with my head. Like I said, my place was kind of old, and the door would rattle in the hinges really easily if you touched it. When the door moved slightly, the guy quickly ducked around the corner. Everybody's doorway went in a little, so if you hid around the corner right in front of it, you could not be seen. I'm not sure what he was doing, but I didn't like it at all. I kept watching, and after about 30 seconds or so, he moved back into view and knocked again. I kept still and did not move. He knocked once more and then finally left. I don't know what he wanted, but I just had a bad feeling about it. Less than a month later, I moved out of that apartment, and I'm glad that I did. I'm a 26-year-old female. Last year, I moved into my first house after living in an apartment for a few years. It was an older house in the neighborhood outside the city that I worked in. I really liked it a lot and was excited to have a front yard to plant flowers in and a back patio to sit out and enjoy nice days. As for the house itself, it had 2 floors and was a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. When I moved in, I saw my next-door neighbor outside in the front yard. He watched me move my stuff in as my parents and friend helped me. At one point, he offered to help us. The guy said his name was Jerry, and just came off as a little creepy to me. He was an older guy who, for whatever reason, just had a sort of scary look to him. We turned down his offer because we didn't need the help, and the guy went back on his front porch and just watched us the rest of the time. The next day, when I was all moved in, I was by myself in my living room watching TV. I then heard a knock coming from my front door. I looked at the clock and saw that it was almost midnight. I looked out my window then. I noticed Jerry was standing there. He was on my front step and then looked directly over to me and waved. I didn't know he could see me in the window, and I wasn't planning on answering the door this late, but after I knew he saw me, I figured I had to. I walked over to the door and opened it. Jerry asked me if I was having a good time watching TV. I told him I was just about to go to bed and asked him why he was knocking on my door so late. Jerry said he wanted to invite me over for dinner the next night as a welcoming to me for moving in. I really didn't want to and told him that I was busy the next night. At the time I wasn't, but I didn't want to go to his house. He seemed disappointed, but then said maybe another time. I said yes, maybe another time just to be nice, and then he walked away. I then turned off all my lights and went to bed. I couldn't help but feel creeped out by this guy. The fact that he knew that I was watching TV meant that he had looked through my window, and him knocking on my door at almost midnight was really weird. The next day, I went to work, and afterwards got food with one of my friends. I went home after that, and I would say it was about 7 p.m. or so when I arrived. When I got inside my house, I took off my shoes and began walking to my bedroom. Just then, I heard a noise coming from down the hall near the kitchen. There was definitely somebody inside my house. I heard the footsteps coming towards me in the hallway, and didn't want to stay there and wait to see who it was, so I ran back to my front door and didn't even bother putting my shoes back on. I ran outside and got to my car. Once I was inside my car, I backed out of the driveway. As I was starting to drive away, I saw my front door open in my house behind me. I saw Jerry exiting my house and sort of running back to his. I pulled over my car and called the police. I sat on the other side of the road and waited for them to arrive. When they did, they went to Jerry and confronted him. He admitted to breaking into my house and was caught. After that, I didn't have to worry about him anymore. A few months later, someone else moved in, and since then, it's been great. I live with my wife in a very quiet neighborhood. We're a little bit out in the country and have lived here for years. I know a good number of my neighbors, but not all of them, obviously. The houses are a little bit more spread out, and the yards are rather large, with some woods around. Most of the yards are several acres or more. A few years ago, I was at home with my wife one night, and it was rather late. In fact, I was about to go to bed in a couple of minutes when I heard a knock at the front door. This was highly unusual. Being out here in the country, seldom do we ever get door-to-door salesmen or anything like that, but especially not at 11 o'clock at night. I headed over to see who on earth could possibly be there at this hour. My wife told me not to even answer the door, but I was curious. I opened it, and I saw a young man standing there. I had never seen him before in my life. He looked to be maybe in his mid-20s and wore a sweatshirt and jeans. He said hi, and then said that he was my neighbor from down the street. He proceeded to tell me that he had accidentally locked himself out of his house. Then he asked me if I wouldn't mind letting him stay at my house for the night. I told him that I would mind, and I asked him why he didn't just call a locksmith or the police, or just break back in there. The man claimed that he had called a locksmith, but they wouldn't be out until morning, and he didn't want to break anything. I asked him how he even locked himself out. I'm not even sure how that's possible, because I locked my door from the outside with my key. The guy said that he didn't even know, but his keys were inside and his doors were all locked. He wasn't really making much sense, and this situation was seeming really suspicious. I also noticed as I was standing there talking to the young man that there was a car parked on the side of the street a ways down that was running. I asked him if that was his car and pointed at it, and he said no, he didn't know who that was. It was pretty unusual for a car to park on the side of the street because of the driveways being long and it also being a quiet area. This was also highly unusual. I told the guy that he couldn't stay at our place, so he would have to get to Steppen. He practically begged me and claimed that he had asked all the other neighbors and I was his last hope. That also made no sense because we were not like the last house on the street or anything. We were kind of in the middle, so why would he randomly go to our house last? I wasn't buying a cent of this guy's crap. I told him to get a hotel, and he said that he didn't have any money as his wallet was in his house. This guy had an excuse for everything. I finally told him to get lost or I would call the cops, and he finally gave up and said okay. I shut the door and the guy then walked off down the driveway. I stayed at the window and watched the guy though to see where he would go. He walked out into the street and then walked right up to the car that was parked on the side of the road. He then proceeded to get in the back seat of it and then the car drove away. I was not surprised. That guy was definitely up to no good. I called the police non-emergency line and reported it. I'm hoping that he didn't get anybody else to fall for his trick. I never heard anything more regarding it, but I'm really glad that I didn't let him into my house. I'm not sure what would have happened if I had let him stay the night like he wanted. Things like that happening in our area are very unusual. I probably shouldn't have even answered the door. I probably should have just listened to my wife. But needless to say, that guy did not even live in our neighborhood. My girlfriend and I have been together for a little over 2 years now. Not long after we started dating, she moved into my place. I'd been living there alone for a while, so having someone around felt different at first, but in a good way. The house is small, but the yard is big for the area. When summer came around, we decided to make the most of it. We bought one of those above-ground pools from a hardware store and set it up behind the garage. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was perfect for hot afternoons after work. We started inviting friends over on weekends. Sometimes we'd grill, other times we'd sit around a fire pit built with leftover bricks. One night we had a few people over, just relaxing and having a couple drinks. It was getting late when a man from the house behind ours walked through the alleyway to our yard. I had seen him before but never really talked to him. He introduced himself and started chatting like he had known us for years. He talked about the weather, the neighborhood, and our dog. Then he started asking about the pool. He kept looking at it while he talked. "Looks nice," he said. "Must be good on days like this." My girlfriend and I said yeah, it was nice to cool off after work. Then he said something like, "I wish I had something like that, and I see you two out there all the time." He was probably around 50 or so. We were both in our early 20s. I didn't think much of it at the time. I'm usually pretty easygoing with neighbors, so I told him if he ever wanted to swim, he could just ask us and let us know. A few weeks later, I was still at work one afternoon when my girlfriend called me. She told me she had gotten home early that day. Our driveway curves around the house, so you can't see the backyard from the street. When she walked into the kitchen, she looked out the window above the sink. That window looked straight into the yard, and the neighbor was in our pool, just floating there. She told me she froze for a second because she didn't expect to see anyone back there. I told her to stay inside and I would be home as soon as I could. By the time I got back, he was gone. I was mad. I knew I had told him he could swim sometime, but I meant with permission, not just showing up when nobody was home. So I took the ladder off the pool and put it in the shed so that nobody could use it unless we took the ladder out. Later that evening, I saw the guy outside while walking the dog. I told him he couldn't just come into our yard like that. He apologized and said he thought it was fine because of what I had said before. He promised it wouldn't happen again. For a while, things were quiet. But after that, we started noticing him more often. He would stand in his yard and look towards our house. Sometimes he would be out there when my girlfriend got home from work. Sometimes it was late at night, too. Around that same time, we were talking with some other neighbors down the street, and his name came up. One of them told us something that shocked me. Apparently, the guy had a history. They said he had been in trouble before involving a family member. They didn't know all the details, but they said it was serious. That already made things uncomfortable. Then another neighbor told us something that was even worse. They said the guy had been bragging to another neighbor that he could see inside our house at night. He had been talking about looking at my girlfriend through our windows, to the point where he had binoculars that he could use as well. The way our house is set up, the kitchen and laundry area both have large windows facing the backyard. At the time, we didn't have blinds or curtains there. I had lived alone before and never thought about it. My girlfriend usually changes clothes in the laundry room after work. When I heard that story, I felt my face getting hot and I was furious. I asked our neighbor if they had any extra private property signs because they had some put up around in their yard. They gave me one and a metal stake. I walked straight into our backyard with a hammer and planted the sign right by the fence line. The guy was outside when I did it. I yelled across the yard telling him to stay away from our property and stop watching our house. A couple other neighbors came outside because of the shouting. My girlfriend stayed inside the whole time. After that, I came back in. I taped a blanket over the laundry room window, and I told her we'd buy proper curtains the next day. Later that night, we looked the guy up online. It turned out that the stories were true. Years earlier, he had been arrested for abusing a relative, and he was also a registered offender. Thankfully, about 2 months later, we noticed a moving truck at his place. By the end of the week, he was gone.
I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. I live on the first floor, and this is something that happened not too long ago. In fact, it was just a few weeks ago and is still very fresh in my mind. I've lived in this apartment building for a little over a year. Even though I've lived here for a while though, I really don't know many of my neighbors. I do know a couple, but most of the people here kind of keep to themselves. Everyone who I've interacted with has been very nice though. The building is pretty large, and I'm not sure how many people live here, but it's a lot. One night, I was by myself watching a movie. It was pretty late, maybe like 11 p.m. I was in the living room and on the couch, and out of nowhere heard a knock at my front door. I wondered who could be knocking on my door so late. I paused the movie and got up from the couch. When I got to the front door, I checked. My next door neighbor was there. I recognized him, and I really didn't know him all that well, but I had said hi to him in the hallways once or twice. I unlocked the door and was going to open it. I had no reason to think anything suspicious of him. But as soon as I unlocked the door, I heard him walking away quickly. By the time I had opened up the door, he was gone. I even heard his door closing moments later, but didn't see him. I just shook my head and went back to my living room. This was very strange, but whatever. Maybe 20 minutes later, it happened again though. I was sitting on the couch and heard a knock on the door. I walked over faster this time. When I got there, I looked out the peephole. I saw my neighbor running away from the door before I had even tried opening it. Now this was really odd. I didn't know what he was doing. For the rest of that night though, he didn't come back. The next morning, as I was leaving my apartment to go to work, I had the thought to ask him what the deal was. I stopped at his door and knocked. He answered and was really friendly and seemed normal. I told him about the night before and asked him what was going on. He acted all confused and said that he had no idea what I was talking about. I told him that I was sure I had seen him. He still denied it though, and said that it must have been somebody that looked like him or something. I wasn't really buying this. I just agreed with him to be nice and then left. I got back from work that afternoon and things were pretty normal for the rest of the day. Fast forward to that night though. I went out onto my balcony just briefly to see how the weather was. I wasn't out there for long and went back inside. We have balconies on the first floor, but they're like 2 feet above ground, so it's the same thing as the people's balconies on the second and third floors, just not high up at all. It makes it so everybody can have an outdoor space that's the same, and the landscape doesn't allow for the first floor residents to have patios. Anyways, after I went inside, I was in my bedroom when suddenly I heard my sliding door from the balcony opening. I first went towards the noise and looked out to the living room. I saw my next door neighbor entering my apartment. I ran to my bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. Just moments later, he arrived at the door and tried opening it. I wasted no time and got out my phone and called the police. I yelled at him that I was calling the police as well. He tried opening the door a couple of more times and then banged on it a few times as well, but said nothing. Then, only a few seconds later, I heard him walking away and he was gone. The police showed up a while after that, and I reported the whole thing. At first, my neighbor denied it, but there were security cameras outside which proved his guilt. I'm really glad that the cameras were there. I haven't had to worry about him since, and he's not allowed to go near me. I still live in my apartment, but always make sure to lock the balcony door.
Last year, I lived in Oregon for the year. I don't live there anymore because I changed companies. I moved into a house about 20 minutes outside of Portland. The area was pretty nice and I enjoyed it, but just my third night living there, somebody tried breaking into my house. I was setting up a TV stand in my bedroom when I heard some noises coming from the other side of the house. I started to walk over, wondering what it was. I made my way out of my bedroom through the hallway and near the dining room. When I was walking over to the dining room, I heard the back door open. I was not expecting that. I backed up a few steps, and I briefly heard footsteps in my house, and then they turned around and left, and I heard the door open and close again. I went over to my side window and looked outside. I saw a man walking away at a pretty fast speed, but as he was walking away, I got a really good look at his face. He was about average height and had dark brown, kind of messy hair. I went over to my back door and locked it. I'm not really sure how the guy got in, but next I called the police. They came out to my house, but the man was long gone by then. I gave a description and all the information that I could, but it really wasn't much to go on. I was hoping that the police would be able to find whoever had done it, But after they left, I didn't feel too confident. I just didn't really feel like I gave them enough information, and the man would probably be long gone by now. I was a little bit concerned that whoever the guy was would be back. A few days later, I was outside doing some yard work. I was pretty close to the street, and I noticed somebody was walking down it in my direction. Beyond that, I didn't pay much attention because I was focused on what I was doing. When the man walking down the street reached me, he did not walk past, but he stopped where I was and said hi. I turned around and saw the guy. It was the same man who had broken into my house. He was smiling now and asked me if I had just moved in here. I tried to act normal and I said yes. He was really friendly and said that he lived just down the street. We talked for maybe a minute, but I wasn't able to keep the conversation going very well for obvious reasons. I'm not sure if he picked up on it or not that I had seen him. I really don't think that he thought I had seen him at all. Why would he go over to me if he did? After we talked, he walked away. I went back to the police after that and told them the information. It turned out that the guy did in fact live on my street, but he denied it, and the police had no solid evidence, so I couldn't really do anything. I did install a security camera at my front and back doors. However, nothing else strange happened. I don't live there anymore, and I'm glad that I don't have to live near that guy. I still wonder why he was trying to break into my house, though. I live by myself in an apartment. When I first moved in here, I got a rude awakening, literally. It was probably like my second or third week living here. I have a small one-bedroom apartment in a pretty decent building, and my place is on the second floor. It's a nice place overall, not a dump by any means, and most of the people seem nice. At the time, I didn't know any of my neighbors immediately around me though. So after a short time there, one night I was awoken to the sound of someone knocking loudly at my front door. I got up and out of bed, seeing that it was after midnight, and I went to see who was there. The knocking stopped by the time I arrived at the door though. When I looked through the people, nobody was there. It was strange. I was kinda creeped out by this odd event. Why would anybody come to my door so late? By the next day though, I had mostly forgot about it. However, a few nights later, the same thing happened again, except this time I was still awake. It was late at night and I heard a knocking on the door. I got up and went to the peephole and saw this woman knocking. I didn't know what she wanted, so I went to open the door. I unlocked it first. However, as soon as I started to do this, I heard her take off running. By the time the door was open and I looked into the hallway, I saw her entering an apartment door just down the hall and across it. So she was my neighbor. I didn't know why she was seemingly pranking me like this. I went back in and was confused, but there was no more knocking that night. The very next night though, she came back and knocked at my door again at around the same time, and once more ran away. It was pretty annoying, to be honest. I didn't know if she was pranking me or what. Maybe she was serious, maybe she wanted something, but every time I went to the door she would just run away. I let it go this time. However, the very next night she did it again, and I had it. I went to the door really fast, but she was already gone by then. So I walked over there and I knocked on her door. She didn't answer or do anything, so I knocked again, this time louder. When I did, I heard her yell really loud from the other side of the door. It was like she was right there on the other side, but I hadn't heard her walking over to the door. She told me to go away and stop bothering her so late at night. She sounded seriously angry. I could not believe her nerve. It was like she was acting like I was the one banging on her door all the time. I yelled that she was the one who kept knocking on my door, and I told her to stop. She interrupted me and yelled really loud for me to go away or she would call the cops. I was furious. I told her to do it, and then I banged on her door really loud one last time. Then I walked back to my apartment. The cops never came. But after that, she never knocked on my door late at night again either. I still live here. I don't think she lives there anymore though. I never saw her again around the building or anything. I haven't seen anyone coming or going from that apartment. However, I'm hoping that she does not currently still live here. I moved into a new house to live in this year because I was relocated for my job. The first couple of weeks were fine, but recently I had some things go missing inside my house. And weird things too, like food items or some of my clothes. It's been very confusing to me. Until a couple of days ago when I was pulling into my driveway from work and I saw the guy that lives next door in my backyard. When I pulled in, he walked back into his yard and didn't look at me. Sure, he could have been just retrieving something that blew into his yard or whatever, but I just can't help but think they might be related. I know he was good friends with the previous owner of my house, so I feel like maybe he has a spare key or something. Then, last night when I was sleeping, I heard my front door open. I went to the edge of my door and looked to see if it was my next door neighbor. Sure enough, it was. I went out to confront him, but when I did, he turned and ran. I went to his house and knocked on the door. There was no answer. I went back in and called the police. When they arrived, I told them what had happened, but they couldn't find my neighbor anywhere. He disappeared, and I haven't seen him since. He didn't take his car because I didn't see him drive away. Nobody knows where he is.
The summer block party was a yearly tradition on our street. It was a chance to catch up with neighbors, grill hot dogs, and let the kids run wild. That year, we had a new neighbor on the street. I never learned his first name, but he introduced himself as Mr. Grayson. He kept to himself, rarely coming out during the day. As we set up our tables and chairs that night for the block party, I noticed him standing in his yard watching us. I was wondering if he'd make an appearance at the block party, since I never saw him out of his house much, and he didn't seem like the friendliest person. The party kicked off at around 5. It basically consisted of kids racing through the street, laughing, while adults chatted over drinks. I was helping my husband flip burgers when I noticed Mr. Grayson walking around the perimeter of the gathering, hands in his pockets, observing quietly. A few neighbors waved at him, but he didn't give a wave back. It was strange how he seemed to drift from one edge of the party to another, always just outside of the main group of people, and never coming in it for food or to talk to anyone. Every once in a while, I checked to see what Mr. Grayson was up to. He seemed to always be near the area where the kids were playing, just standing awkwardly in the shadows. When it got dark, the party shifted to the backyard where we had a string of lights hung up. The atmosphere was lively, and we lit a fire pit to roast marshmallows, but Mr. Grayson had disappeared again. I didn't see him for a while, until I noticed him near the back of his house, just standing in his yard. Later that evening, I noticed Mr. Grayson was in the backyard, standing too close to where the kids were playing. It was so strange. Throughout the rest of the night, he kept disappearing back to his house and yard, and then reappearing back closer to the party, but always near where the kids were playing. I finally had a free moment from hosting, and decided to go over and talk to Mr. Grayson, hoping to invite him to more of the heart of the party. I asked him if everything was okay, and if he wanted to come sit by the fire pit. He tilted his head, and an unsettling smile creeped across his face. He said he was fine and, quote, was just enjoying the fun from afar. They seemed to have so much energy. Before I could respond, he turned and walked back towards his house, disappearing into the darkness. The rest of that evening, he would pop in and out of view, lurking in the shadows, never quite leaving, but never fully engaging. In my mind, it was a strange night, but he might have had good intentions and was just a strange person. A couple years later, however, he got arrested for possession of some very bad and inappropriate content. I can't help but always think back to that night and how creepy he was being, but at least he only ever watched and didn't try to take any physical action towards the kids.
This happened to me on January 17th, 2026. The neighbors were fighting next door. I heard the loud yelling and thumping from the weak walls of the apartment. At this time, I was in the kitchen preparing meals and getting ready to receive some packages. Then, out of nowhere, someone started to knock at my front door. It started out normal, but quickly started getting louder and more demanding. I went to look through my peek hole and saw that there was a lady there. Her huge eyes were looking back at me. I stepped back and I asked what she wanted. She started asking for a phone and whining. The lady really wanted me to open the door, but I didn't want to. She started to shake the doorknob violently and then began pushing and clawing at the door. I walked away. The lady that lives with me also went to check through the door from the noise. She was actually considering opening the door to that crazed woman. I kept telling her not to, and I was even so scared that I weaponed up. If she comes in, we're all going out together, was the only thing going through my mind in that moment. We didn't open the door though. Instead, we kept asking what the lady wanted and telling her to go away. But she did not. Here's some audio I recorded of the event.
Get the away! Hey,วันนี้มีตัวให้มันเป็นให้มันตัว What do you want? This is not your apartment.
Then, just like it happened, it just stopped. She moved away from the door and just left. Lucky for us, that crazy lady moved on, but we're still reeling from what happened. Back when I was a kid, we moved into this new house when I was about 8 years old. We only lived there for about 3 or 4 years, and we moved around a few times for my dad's job. But I remember this place pretty well, and there was something kind of creepy that happened when we lived there. So the house was in a pretty quiet neighborhood. However, there were a lot of houses there, as it was a pretty typical neighborhood of many streets with a good amount of houses on them all next to each other. The houses were not all the same size though, as most of them looked different from each other. Some were larger or smaller than others, but for the most part it was a middle-class area. I remember that our house had a decent-sized front yard and a good-sized driveway as well. So I would go outside all the time. I didn't know many of the neighbors on our street, but I remember that there was this house that was behind the one across the street from us and one over to the right. This house was always visible because it was 3 stories tall, so it kind of towered over the others. So at some point, I don't recall exactly when, I started noticing something from this tall house. When I would be outside, I would often see someone in one of the top windows of the house, seemingly watching me with binoculars. It appeared to be a woman, but I couldn't tell many details about her at all. It was really far away, but it always looked like she was watching me. For some reason, at first, it didn't seem to bother me too much. And then I didn't know if she was really watching me or maybe something else nearby, like maybe she was bird watching. I was too far to tell exactly what she was looking at, but it often appeared as though she was looking right at me. It wouldn't happen every time I was outside, but it would happen quite often, and she would do almost the same thing every time. She would just be there in the window with binoculars, staring right at me seemingly. When I looked over at her, she wouldn't move or anything. In fact, she would barely move at all, and I never saw anybody else at that window either. It was really weird. And after it happened at least like 10 different times, it kind of creeped me out. One time when she was watching me, I was confused by it like always. So for some reason on this occasion, I decided to wave up at her. This time when I did, she did not wave back at me, but actually moved away and out of view. That was the only unusual thing I remember through most of it. Being a kid though, I would just continue to go outside and hang out there. I really had no idea who she was, and I didn't tell anybody about it either. Then I remember that after probably months of this, I went outside one time at night. I don't remember why I was outside or exactly how late it was, but I know that it was completely dark out. As I was outside there in the driveway or front yard area, I remember noticing the neighbor watching me from the window again. For some reason, it felt creepier at night. But then, as I was watching her watch me, she moved away from the window and was quickly out of view. I didn't think too much of it. In fact, I was obviously glad that she was gone. So I stayed outside, and then I remember like 2 or 3 minutes later, I heard a car start to drive down our street from the end. Our street was really quiet, especially at night, so I looked over to see. I didn't recognize the car, but it was driving really slow. Surprisingly though, I noticed the car slowing down and then parking on the side of the road just about across from our house on the other side of the street. It was not exactly in front of our house and slightly closer to the neighbors, but it was close enough. When I looked to the driver's window though, at first I couldn't see well enough. But then I noticed it appeared to be the same woman who would watch me from the window. This had never happened before. She parked the car but did not get out, and she appeared to be looking at me again. I was so creeped out that I ran inside and then covered all the windows. When I looked out of her front window maybe 10 minutes later, she was gone. After that, I didn't go outside for a while, especially not at night. However, when I returned to going outside again, maybe a few weeks later, I didn't see her anymore. I never noticed her watching me from her window again, and I never saw her car either. I'm not sure what was going on there, but it was really strange. Maybe she moved, maybe she just decided to stop spying on me, but we didn't live in that house for too long, as I said. I don't know if she still lives there or not, But I randomly remember that, and I wonder what the deal was.